You're listening to KQAS 460, real radio for real people. Hopefully you've been enjoying the midnight hour of music here. Wrapping up there with John Coltrane's all-time classic of love, Supreme. Y'all been hearing about this .com bubble that's burst? Well, if you have, then I think we've got exactly the place where you need to go. This hour of programming is sponsored by Fabian's Bit Bucket. Are you in need of something effervescent to drag you out of the doldrums and into the data-driven utopia that awaits you in Silicon Alley? Is the vision of your future muddied by a lack of understanding the possibilities of the hip, new World Wide Web? Are you too cool for wine coolers? At Fabian's Bit Bucket, we have what you need to put some sparkle back into your life. The .com bubble may have crashed, but our on-tap Zima has more bubbles per mug than there are Beanie Babies per capita. So come on down, grab a seat, and ask for one of our patented Z-Martinis. Find new friends, opportunities, and experiences at Fabian's Bit Bucket. Patrons up for a challenge can try and solve our laboratory labyrinth. Locate the stairs to the basement and navigate through a maze of boxes and doorways to nowhere in particular to find the restroom and earn yourself a free drink coupon. Any patrons who bring in a recent pink slip receive 50% off your first 2 Zima-based beverages. I don't know about all you, but my job is plenty secure here at KQAS. But if you happen to be on the outs at your company, sounds like you need to get down to Fabian's immediately. That does it for paying our bills for this hour. Coming up next, a trip to Birdland. Nothing but Charlie Parker in all his majesty. Here on KQS 460. Real radio for real people. Thank you for joining us in Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to a highly fixated review of large, dense books, specifically the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate, and I'm one of the co-hosts.
My name is Cody.
And I'm Will.
And this week through, we are going to be discussing chapters 7 to 9 of Bleeding Edge. We have pretty rapidly come up on the first 100 pages of this book already.
I know.
Yeah, it feels like we just started, but there's already been a lot covered, and the book itself is still kind of just ramping up.
Hello, it is me again, Will, from the future, with the summaries. In Chapter 7, Maxine decides to visit Virva and Justin, bringing Otis along for a playdate with Fiona. While they engage in a dolls and action figures emulation of Lucas's Yuppie Destroyer game, Maxine gets acquainted with the theory behind Deep Archer, which comes in fits as her teasing of the hackers is consistently appreciated as sincere naivete. Meanwhile, the reader catches up on the origins of this dynamic duo's partnership, tracing back to hapless stumbling into situations well above their heads at Stanford. It was a combination of their idealism and the status of mark that California kindly bestows upon its children that brought them to New York, seeking a venture capital market that runs on more than facade. No luck. Regardless, with funding eventually stemming from that overkill crowd back in the valley, they opened shop in the Flatiron District and had found enough success to weather the crash of the bubble a few years later. Finally, seated in front of a remarkably excessive LCD monitor, Maxine's faux mockery gives way to honest amazement when the splash screen of the Not game appears, showing an archer bent over a seemingly impossible landscape. Simultaneously simple pixel art and Baroque magnum opus, the only movement the simulation of breeze. At first, she's in a busy train depot waiting to embark and finds a schedule board after sufficiently easing herself in via clicking on every object she comes across on the way. But when the pattern continues and she selects one of the listings, the setting fades into a platform, then the car itself, before speeding across the landscape impossibly fast, so fast as to render even visibility of those features already past impossible. The crowdsourced images surrounding her are intoxicating, and Maxine is more than happy to click along, exploring the variety and creativity on display. As much unsettled by the impossible forms around her avatar as thrilled, a sort of déjà vu descends upon her. However, as one or both of the programmers light up their marijuana cigarettes and Virva looms over shoulder to vicariously join in, Maxine realizes she's been enthralled for plenty long and logs off. They discuss the architectural inheritance of this exercise in irreversibility and wanderlust, onion routing and associative chains, with their homebrewed encryption enhancing the maze-like nature of it all. The obscurity of extraction implied therein leaves Maxine haunted with questions. Chapter 8. When our investigator next rendezvous with Reg, it's at a peculiar bagel shop, and she learns about the vulnerabilities the Furby has brought to corporate America. Thanks to one of these inconspicuous snitches, Reg was tipped off about some of the specific financial instruments Hash Slingers has been utilizing, most crucially the Islamic world's wire transfer alternative, the Hawala. Digging into these connections, which lead back to Dubai, Reg passes along enough info for Maxine to feel justified in arranging a surprise meetup with Eric. Sometime later, she ducks into a dive diner near the Deep Archer developer's headquarters, choosing to believe whatever her bladder is trying to tell her. There, she of course runs into Lucas, who has apparently just dumped his latest squeeze, and is concerned by how long Cassidy is spending in the bathroom. Peeing not being a conceivable response to the end of a relationship with him. Well, following the thread to the toilets, Maxine finds out that Cassidy not only didn't even have Lucas's real name, not only previously worked at Hugar, but in fact had created the breathtaking splash screen image for Deep Archer that had so arrested her interlocutor. Once they leave the safe screening provided by the stalls, Maxine is not shocked to find her particularly young. She goes to check if Lucas/Kyle has left yet to report back to the artist in the bathroom, but leaves him with scorn and a recommendation to pay Cassidy for her work. Chapter 9. Arriving back at the office, presumably from the previously described entanglement, Maxine receives a call from the previously established client, an agent of the local revenue service, trying to pin down some details about a sales tax evasion conspirator named Phipps Epperdew. While he updates her with the latest details of the ongoing indictment, we are treated to the story of Maxine's trip to Quebec, tracking down one of the spurned collaborators in Montreal. Felix Boingo was her man, and with only a slight fib from her, he was happy to divulge pages worth of information on the investigant's methods, and they also spent a wonderful, not to mention unromantic, evening in together. Later, as phantasms featuring Reg have just stopped distracting her from sleep, Maxine is jerked awake by a phone call. From who? None but the aforementioned himself. They arrange to meet shortly. There, Reg reveals the big news. Armed only with his trusty camera, he accidentally picked the lock to what he insists was a clearly marked bathroom, and found himself in an electronics lab staffed by chatting Arabs speaking non-English. He tried out the toilet excuse and tested his assumptions by asking where the bathroom was in phrasebook Arabic, before politely being directed elsewhere. Almost immediately afterward, Gabriel Ice asked for a short meeting, wherein Reg was obliquely threatened, should he not turn over any footage he might have taken of the room. Of course, Despard insists that he wasn't rolling, nothing to see there. He agrees to give Maxine a coffee, and says that Eric is out, on foot, chasing down Ice's Hawaldar. Much later, showering, Maxine is startled by the appearance of the face of her ex-husband Horst through the shower curtains. He greets her, says he got in a day early, and backs out after her relatively gracious outrage at the shock. She finds him settling in the kitchen, already digging into an old tub of ice cream with 2 spoons. She invites him to stay for dinner just as Ziggy gets home from the school play rehearsals. They greet each other in a heartwarming display of father-son shit-talking, and just as Maxine diverts them into discussing takeout options, Otis arrives and the teasing begins anew. Eventually they decide on pizza, and the boys all settle in to watch a pro-golf biopic marathon while the head of the household contemplates her work. Horst is maybe planning to stay in the city for the foreseeable future this time, having leased office space in the World Trade Center. The next day, he takes the boys to see the landmark from the inside, and in the meantime, between them conking out on the sofa and getting back from this field trip, Maxine tries to decide how she feels about all of this.
That being said, what did we think of chapters 7 through 9?
I think that if you aren't into this book after these 3 chapters, I don't understand what else is needed to get you into this book. These are, I think, up to this. I think I said this last week that those were my favorite chapters. I think at this point these are probably my favorite. I think chapter 7 particularly is a really good example of everything that Pynchon is capable of. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a distillation of all of his strengths and abilities as a writer, just packed into a single chapter of this book. And then chapters 8 and 9 get back to the really wonderful, hard-boiled and noir kind of writing that I love when he does, and that really make this such a good read for me. And Will and I were talking before we started recording about how rereading this book, at least for me, rereading it and for him, having finished it just recently and going through it again now, like this is, it's frustrating how slept on this book is and how little discourse there is on it. Mm-hmm. And whether that's a matter of recency bias or because of its, quote unquote, being Pynchon light, whatever it is, similar to Vineland, I think it's really frustrating that this book just does not get the attention that I feel it really deserves. Not saying it's his best book by any means, at least not for me. But it is a fantastic read, and it's chapters like these that really remind me why I love this book.
Yeah, the tag of Pynchon light, I feel like really doesn't make sense here. Like, I guess as much as I disagree with it, I can kind of understand the logical process that some people may have arrived at when Vineland came out that made them think of that. As we talked about a lot, that following Gravity's Rainbow, and after such a long, period in time, you can kind of see how a cynical worldview would lead to that kind of a thought process. But like Sure. Will mentioned in the very first episode, the way that he wraps back around to what he was doing in Gravity's Rainbow in this book with the long tangents and the asides and the like nested storytelling with such a frequent degree, I feel like that alone should make it very difficult for somebody to not give this book that kind of a tag, and yet they still do so. Like, I feel like there's significantly less of a case to be made by anybody that this book would be worthy of such a derogatory title.
Yeah, the best reasoning I could come up with to justify it, I guess, is, well, it's superficially similar to The Crying of Lot 49, which everyone knows is Pynchon light. But, it doesn't make a lot of sense because, I mean, he is on his like anagram run here. He's doing goofy abstract stuff with the prose. It's not straightforward in any way. It's just less obscure than some of his more complicated stuff.
Yeah, he just found a way to do the same thing that he'd been doing, but in a more easily digestible format, which, if anything, should be commended. Which is why I hate the fact that in Jonathan Franzen's review of this book in the New York Times, he basically said, it's really frustrating that Pynchon has not developed a late style. It's like, shut the fuck up! Like, he has developed a late style. He found a way to create more compelling characters than his previous books, and he found a way to do the same, actual, like, prose tricks that he'd been doing, but in a way that is more digestible for the reader. Like, it's such
What if that's, oh my god, that's such... oh my god. I haven't heard that before. That's really frustrating me. Like, seriously, like... That reads like someone who has read Pynchon chronologically, but stopped after Gravity's Rainbow and then picked up Bleeding Edge. Like, he developed so much as a writer between Gravity's Rainbow and Vineland, like we talked about, and it's like the character writing, the prose, the plot pacing, all those parts of it just got stronger with every book. And I don't understand what he means by he doesn't have a late style.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Look, having read none of his books, I have long-standing beef with Jonathan Franzen, just based off of his Mr. Difficult essay. Like that, complain all you want about long, hard-to-read books being pretentious. That essay, disgusting. But I mean, seriously, the best possible formulation I could think of that is, well, everything between Vineland and Bleeding Edge has been of such a distinct style that you really can't say he has one late style.
Sure.
And that's not what he said, though, is it?
No.
No, I believe like his exact quote is something along the lines of like, Pynchon seems to have refused to develop a late style or something along those lines.
What does he want?
I don't know. I don't know. And that's coming from an author who I would say is one of the more stagnant authors as far as the books that he writes, which is not terrible. Franzen's written some good stuff, but I wouldn't say he's developed a late style by that definition either.
Well, he believes in the contract with the reader. Maybe he thinks Pynchon doesn't, and so it's more. No, I can't even do that bullshit.
No, there's no defense for that comment.
But yeah, I have to agree with Cody. When it comes to if you are not interested in this book past chapter 7, well, you're probably, just not into Pynchon. And I can't remember. It's been so long since I read this for the first time, but I can't quite remember whether it was chapter 6 or 7 that really, got me into the book. But this is definitely like a good point to say that I definitely was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just so, these are some really, really interesting chapters. I wouldn't say all fun.
No.
But definitely like so engaging as a reader, because, at the very least, someone reading it in 2024, you can really tell that he was engaging with the zeitgeist of the early 2010s, and of course with circa 2001, and it's on a very baseline level very impressive for such an old man to have been so engaged, and on a deeper level, a real testament to not necessarily his powers of insight, but at the very least, it's not just a gimmick. These stylistic choices that Pynchon has used throughout his career as an author.
No, not at all. And I would say certainly a testament to his power of research. Like you said, for a guy who was as old as he was when he published this book, for him to have done all the research into like computer coding and the history of like certain like weird online message boards and remailers and all of that, like the fact that he's still opening up, all of those, I guess maybe card catalogs where he's reading about the stuff at the library or something to get that insight and to really do the work to lay down the same quality of knowledge and information as he did in his earlier stuff, which he arguably would have been more connected to from his days at Boeing, like with Gravity's Rainbow, is a testament to, maybe what he views as his contractual obligations to the reader of knowing what he's talking about when he's writing, as opposed to just sort of giving himself a pass and making sort of fly-by-night observations rather than anything meaningful or grounded in real history.
Yeah, well, I think that history of Boeing works in his benefit as a strong foundation for him to build upon, because I think especially and certainly his writing speaks to this, as time has moved forward since technology really the computer age started. It's just moved incrementally faster and has become harder to keep up with by really the majority of people. And for someone of his age at the time he wrote this to know as much as he did about the way the internet works, not necessarily to a highly specific degree, but enough to really show that he knows what he's talking about, really helps, as you both have said, really helps to sell what is going on in this book, especially when you consider that there are so many people of the same age who have zero idea how a computer works.
Yeah.
Despite their assertions otherwise.
Yeah.
And I can say that confidently, having worked in retail and customer service as long as I have.
Yep.
The amount of confident stupidity that exists, especially around computers and computer technology, it's refreshing to see someone who clearly knows what he is talking about.
Yeah. Having worked in computer sales and repair when this book was published and in a couple of years subsequently, those are exactly the kind of people that I wanted to strangle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's not just like on the technological level. I mean, a lot of people these days, when you see people talking about this book, will point like, "Oh my gosh, he cares about Kojima just like I do."
Right.
He's
yeah.
like me.
Yeah.
But honestly, it does. Like, seriously, imagine being somebody in their 70s, spending, a nominal amount of time around children, and being interested enough to actually understand the ways that an artist like Hideo Kojima, is engaging on similar levels to, to the ones he was throughout his career. That is a real engagement with pop culture. It's not just sitting there watching television. It's not just like, oh, my kid played Metal Gear, so I'm going to name drop people.
Right.
Yep. It's not a superficial kind of like, I'm going to throw this in there so that the kids know that I know what they're into. Like, this is someone who is engaged with this media and knows what they're talking about. And it sounds kind of silly to say that, but when you think about it, like, you have to consider like your grandfather being able to sit with you and talk to you about whatever, video games or movies or TV shows you're into, and not just on a like, oh, tell me more kind of level, like, but really able to engage with you about, well, what did you think when this happened, or how did you feel about this character and what they did, or to really be able to talk to you about it. And like, that's not something I had as a kid. And it's certainly, I think, a little more out there now, I think, especially because you have people who grew up when I did that have kids, and I will play video games with my kids and kind of engage with them with some of the things that they do. But yeah, like my generation, that was not, my grandparents did not know any of that stuff. So I think it's really cool to have someone who has stayed as connected as he has throughout his career and can show that.
Yeah, I think that if my 84-year-old grandfather who raises horses in the mountains of Colorado talked about Pennant Fi in a casual conversation with me, I don't think I'd ever recover from that. I think that would fundamentally reshape the way I see my grandfather.
Yeah. I can't imagine my grandfather working on one of his antique cars and then having a discussion about Final Fantasy X with me.
Yeah, definitely. Oh my god. Any other thoughts from the chapters overall, Will?
One second. I have a thought crowning.
Oh, deliver that baby.
It's not that important of a thought. It's just...
It is now.
It is, because I made the analogy. I don't know. I really do. I really find the way that... I don't know. There's just something about the way that he's connecting dots in this book that feels more creatively engaged than a lot of his earlier books. Like the ways that he's writing in, like, oh, Maxine ran into a second random person who used to work at Hulu.
Yeah.
Like that would feel more contrived in his earlier work, and that's a big part of what you've been mentioning, Kate, regarding him being able to convey those uncertainties and those reconfigurable elements without the self-aware contrivance.
Yeah, definitely. And that all comes down to just how like good of a protagonist Maxine is, and her self-possession, as we talked about last week, and just the fact that those connections are being made by her, and it's constantly in service of this big, like, you can tell, especially in these chapters and in the previous three, we talked about that there's something big going on behind the scenes that she is like slowly sort of chipping away at the facade of, and it has a very sinister element to it as she continues to connect those dots in a way that his previous books don't, especially, Inherent Vice being the sort of cleanest comparison from a standpoint of narrative, where in that book it's just sort of like, and I think a lot of it is purposeful by Pynchon, but a lot of that book just feels like you're high as you're going along with Doc, stumbling from place to place, and be like, oh, that's weird, this guy's also involved with that, versus with Maxine, where, and I think the second person who works for Hagawach being a really good example of this, of just like, oh, that's alarm bells that this person is also involved. Like it has a completely different impact on the reader.
Yeah, I think that's the big. Those are good books to compare, because I think that they are kind of, in their own way, they're obviously both playing with the hard boiled and noir genres and the detective novel. But I think where Inherent Vice clearly exists in a very thick haze of marijuana smoke. And it, as you said, like, that book feels like you're stoned. I remember the first time I read it, I kept like stopping, going, how the hell did I get here? Which is very much in service to the story and how it works.
Yeah.
But I think with this one, you mentioned that Maxine is kind of chipping away this facade. I think it's to look at specifically Gabriel Ice and that name. It's almost like you have whatever this is that's in the background is sort of entombed in ice, and she's just chipping away bit by bit and being able to see a little bit more of it at a time. The more she kind of melts the ice or chips it away, and is starting to get more and more of a clear picture. And it's very deliberate. Like, she's getting all of this information through her action and through her intuition and her outright detective skills. And so it's a more sharper, more focused path to get to where we're going, compared to something like Inherent Vice, where it's just much more, it's a more free flowing and loose, and you're stumbling from one room to another, in one area to another part of the story. So I love both parts of both of those, because they're doing so much with that detective story. But I feel like this one is more directly connected to your Hammetts and your Chandlers and your Canes, in the way that it's structured, and the way that its plot moves, and the way that Maxine is, as the detective, is kind of going through the story. So yeah, I am absolutely loving it.
Yeah, same. And I think that we'll get into some of this as we go through this episode and subsequent ones. I think the other interesting thing that he's doing here is that if you're aware of some of the real history around 9/11, from the non-conspiratorial side, where you've kind of stayed up to date on how the Saudis were involved in that, and how some of the payments happened, that if you're coming to this book with that background knowledge, it's a completely different reading experience.
Oh yeah,
where he's really giving his readers two different experiences based upon their own level of knowledge, that will lead to two different sort of, I guess, types of suspense. One being maybe an ironic suspense, where you're aware of how these things are connected and what they're leading to, if you're aware of some of that real history. And it's just as frightening, because you're watching this woman slowly penetrate the conspiracy circle of people looking to bring about, as I've used a couple different times, the end of modern history, versus the just completely kind of terrifying suspense of, I don't know what's happening, and neither does she, and this is all crazy and weird, and I don't like any of it, and it feels wrong. And I don't think that that's the case with a lot of his other books, if not any of them. I think this is one case where he's really succeeded in creating that binary very cleanly for the reader, depending upon what perspective they're coming from. And I think a lot of that is why, to me, this book kind of feels like his parting words to his readers, in the sense of, like, and I've talked about this before, I don't know if I necessarily believe Thomas Pynchon as a radical activist for information dissemination, but if you're someone who does believe that, it's almost like he's telling his readers, like, a lot of this stuff is out in the open, and you know that now because you already understand where I'm going, and you have the keys to search for these things yourselves. But here's a modern example to map to. Do with that what you will.
Yeah.
I think it's very powerful in that regard, as kind of a final statement for his career and the types of things that he's been writing for decades. Well, I don't think I have anything to add to overall thoughts that we haven't already discussed in year two. So chapter 7 opens up with Maxine headed over to the McElmos. I just, that name, if I could pick my own last name, perhaps I would go with McElmo, just out of the absurdity of it. She goes over to the McElmos to experience Deep Archer, and brings her kids. And there's this interesting quote at the bottom of page 67 where it says, scenarios tend to center on violent assault, terrorist shoplifting sprees, and discombobulation, each of which ends in a widespread destruction of the mall, principally at the hands of Fiona's alter ego, the eponymous Melanie, in cape and ammo belts herself, among fiercely imagined smoke and wreckage, with generic plastic bodies horizontal and disassembled everywhere. Otis and Fiona are playing with Barbies, but are doing so in the same way that they play these video games where they're killing yuppies.
Well, actually, it's Melanie's Mall. Is a very different, not Barbie, but almost a more hyper-capitalistic Barbie, really.
Barbie being a colloquial term for dolls.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. And so just an interesting thing to note there that they are repeating the same patterns in their types of play that are not related to video games or these other world fantasies. It's penetrating other parts of what they're doing. And you had a note about this first paragraph in the notes that you had, Cody. Did you want to expand on that thought you had?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I have to wonder how much of that opening paragraph is if Pynchon could really see the writing on the wall of how mass violence would really become, and I hate to use the word the norm for American society, but goddamn, that's kind of where we're getting. With the way that these are kids, like they are still like 15, 16, I think, and playing it's a really morbid game that they're playing when you really boil it down. And especially in the fact that this takes place post Columbine.
True,
but it also takes place pre all the other mass violence events that have taken place since then. And I have to think that someone as insightful and smart as Pynchon is had to have some sense of where things were going if certain things weren't regulated more. And I can't help but feel like that paragraph in particular is kind of pointing at that, especially using knowing that 9/11 frames such a big part of this and the way that things would shape after that. But it really hits hard, I think, especially reading it in 2024. So I can't help but think that he definitely put that in there, kind of knowing where things were going even back in 2013.
Yeah, 2013.
Yeah, and even if it isn't a self-conscious sort of semi-prediction, what it definitely is doing is connecting kind of as you and many people frame it, Kate, the end of history, along with his what I think the point that Against the Day really drives home at, this idea of isolating the fantasy, putting the creative and the destructive power of fantasy, just to repeat myself, into these very limited contexts, and how much of this is meant to be just like, oh, look at kids being violent, and how much of it is supposed to be, look at how restricted these kids' ideas of possibilities are.
Sure. Yeah.
And I just to for anybody listening to that and not catching it, just how many times is says spelled S-E-Z in this book? And what does
Yeah.
that imply?
Right. Yep. Yeah, for those who don't know, Melanie's Mall was like a children's playset in the late 90s, early 2000s of a mall. Like the purpose of this toy was for you to play with, you know, your Barbies or your other Melanie's Mall dolls in just a mega mall was all it was.
To shop, yeah. You
Yeah,
bought it
to shop. You went to go shop to buy a toy to pretend to shop.
Yep.
And yeah, I think the point you brought up about the mundanity of mass shootings in the modern era, which is a phrase I don't think I'd ever say out loud, is very true. And it's possible that, you know, this book being written in 2013, he was reflecting on that, because it was certainly getting to that point already at that juncture in time. And it is there's not much else that I can add beyond what you guys have already said. It's quite an insightful thing for him to just insert there, is like, here's the beginning of this chapter, but it's not what this chapter's about. Like, it's just there. So Maxine is introduced to Justin and his partner Lucas. Well, is introduced to Lucas. She's known Justin. And we get some backstory on the two of them, as far as sort of where they met, and some information about their personal lives, including, I loved this little paragraph where it says, Justin's partner Lucas, who lives down in Tribeca, shows up a little late this evening, having been chasing his dealer through half of Brooklyn in search of some currently notorious weed known as Trainwreck, wearing a green glow-in-the-dark t-shirt reading UTSL, which Maxine at first takes for an anagram of lust or possibly slut, but later learns is Unix for use the source, Luke. Just as a description of a computer programmer. I love it. It's great.
What a nerdy joke.
Yes, absolutely. And we learn that Lucas is quite a nerd. He's stylized departure after your favorite cyberpunk stuff, like Akira, the Neo Tokyo setting there, or Ghost in the Shell, or then there's the reference to Metal Gear Solid by Hideo Kojima, or as he's known around my crib, God. Oh my God. Which just, it makes so much sense that if you were going to be someone creating a virtual reality space and it's not called Second Life, that you would potentially be going off of a cyberpunk model for that, especially if those are some of your influences. Then so then we get into their backstory. Did we have any thoughts on their backstory of meeting at Stanford and starting out in California, and the boxcar race on Sand Hill Road?
I didn't, other than I did appreciate the mention of Jolt Cola, because that really jogged my memory of a long forgotten beverage.
True.
Yeah, no, I'm also fairly I don't know if confused is the right term, but I find this particular set of paragraphs a little tough to glean anything from.
Yeah. I the only thing that I really pulled out of it is just a reference to Sand Hill Road being a real place. Sand Hill Road is this giant road in California that basically connects all the individual cities in the Silicon Valley outside of Mountain View, where Google is. There are over 50 venture capital firms that have their headquarters on this particular road. So the idea that not only would they be going there for funding, but that these weird eccentric people are engaging in this soapbox derby race, it's very entertaining. The only other thing that I really got out of it is the reference to Ian Longspoon is likely a reference to the quote, "He who sups with the devil should have a long spoon," which is a quote from, oh God, I should have written the name down in the margin. I don't know why I did that. It's like, yeah, I'll remember. That's a famous guy.
Canterbury Tales?
Yeah.
Yes, it's from the Canterbury Tales. he who sups to the devil should have a long spoon. So just an idea that like these venture capital firms are not good people. Just another group of people that Pynchon despises. And
so.
Yeah, absolutely. And doing so in that way, I really enjoyed. And also drinking Fernet with ginger ale.
There's some interesting beverage choices in this chapter.
Yeah, there is. Yes.
There's the other one that comes up later, the Kalamactos, which is red wine and essentially Coca-Cola, or maybe Pepsi, I guess.
Yeah.
I never drank red wine, so I don't know that would be good. No, I never liked wine. So I don't know if that would be any good. My wife said it sounded like it would be okay, especially if it was at 4 a.m, like it is in the book. So I'll take her word on that.
It's pretty good.
You go ahead, Will. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I mean, it's pretty good. It's just kind of like a low proof punch cocktail thing.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bit Dr. Peppery almost most of the time. Depends on the wine.
Yeah, I can't say I've had Fernet plenty of times, and Fernet's actually very good with Coca-Cola. It kind of makes Coca-Cola into an herbal drink or herbal tasting drink, which is interesting.
Huh.
But I don't think I'd want to drink it with ginger ale. I think that'd be too strong of an herbal taste between the two of them. Yeah, the only outside of that reference to the Canterbury Tales, the biggest thing that I kind of pull out of this is that Pynchon is making a comment that also the people who are funding these stupid companies are just as childish as the people running them. Between the soapbox derby racing and the fact that this guy goes out to dinner with somebody that he's potentially going to give money to, and then drinks to excess and passes out
in the middle of writing a check with
exactly
all the zeros.
like he's
Google
clearly
zeros, basically.
Yeah, he's clearly just as incompetent as these other people, and as an indictment of this era of history of just like, oh yeah, your company's doing anything with the internet, sure, here's a fuckload of money. I think is really what Pynchon's trying to portray with that backstory being there.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting that you mentioned that too, because prior to that, on the previous page, there's the mention of how a lot of basically the people who were setting up the internet, who were actually doing the legwork, were not necessarily in it for the money. Like they were just basically in there to put it out there, get it out in the world, and then just move on. And there was a big focus on anonymity and all that. The exact quote I'm referencing on page 69. The further in you go, you get passed along one node to the next. The visuals you think you're seeing are being contributed by users all over the world, all for free. Hacker ethic. Each one doing their piece of it, then just vanishing uncredited, adding to the veils of illusion. You know what an avatar is, right? And so that duality between the people who are essentially building this thing, because in 2001, the internet was still in its kind of infancy. As far as what it would eventually become. And so you have all these people who are essentially just doing this for no actual gain to themselves. Like there was no desire for, notoriety or for money or for their name to be remembered forever. They were just doing it because this was the first time that they could really contribute to something that on this massive scale that could really truly benefit a lot of people. On the exact opposite side of that, you have these venture capitalist guys who were just looking at this strictly as a way to make ass loads of money, like unfathomable amounts of money that no single person needs, and had the capital to just write these stupid ass checks. And it's just such an interesting, comparison between those two, and the fact that they were essentially working together to make this whole thing. Yeah.
There's a lot of very interesting people in that early era. Like Tim Berners-Lee is a really interesting guy, someone who's considered sort of one of the inventors of the internet. I would highly recommend to kind of, if the stuff that Cody just talked about interests the reader, I'd highly recommend reading like John Perry Barlow's the Declaration of Cyberspace, which starts out as, I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose on us. You have no moral right to rule us, nor what is it? God, I used to have this like memorized. But like that's sort of where he kind of starts at, is this idea of, you know, the internet is this free and open place, and how something like venture capital or something like, you know, government controlled assets like Gabriel Ice, or, you know, maybe Josh Harris, comes in and destroys all of that from people who really started out doing this for better reasons. You know, and even the internet has its relations to DARPANet and some stuff that the government was using to track people prior to. But there are a lot of very interesting luminaries from the beginning of that era that really their work was co-opted, and capital is a big way that a lot of that stuff gets co-opted.
Yeah, a second point of recommendation that's a little bit less historically engaged, but more, if you're the kind of person who likes reading manifestos, Free Culture by Lawrence Lessig postdates the setting of this book, but it's very relevant to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
And I love the choice to bookend this section, but, you know, the nostalgic throwback section, with that discussion of the hacker ethic, and contrasting it on the other side with Maxine's kind of general speculation and disbelief in, I'm going to quote, "How is a business plan that depends on faith in network effects kicking in someday different from the celestial pastry exercise known as the Ponzi scheme?" And the deep irony of that is that, it's 100%, Maxine is correct, but also she's wrong in the meaningful sense, because look at how people refuse to, you know, leave Twitter or something because they're comfy there, and they know that's where they can get, you know, they can feel like they're kept up to date in some meaningful way.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk referred to it as like the digital town square when he talked about why he wanted to buy it. And like, as much as I hate that guy, like, unfortunately he is like pretty accurate that like journalists break important news stories on Twitter, and, you know, important work by certain individuals is done through that platform. And it is sad that those things are so easily twisted into something else, and is turned into something monetizable and distributable by capital. It is a real shame. Which brings up, I think, the quote here on page 71 that starts with "Maxine can imagine." Does someone want to read that paragraph?
I've got it right here. Yeah. Maxine can imagine. Silicon Alley in the 90s provided more than enough work for fraud investigators. The money in play, especially after about 1995, was staggering, and you couldn't expect elements of the fraudster community not to go after some of it, especially HR executives for whom the invention of the computerized payroll was often confused with a license to steal. If this generation of con artists came up short now and then in IT skills, they made up for it in the area of social engineering, and many entrepreneurs, being trusting souls, got taken. But some distinctions between hustling and being hustled broke down. It didn't escape Maxine's notice that, given stock valuations on some startups of interest chiefly to the insane, there might not be much difference. How is a business plan that depends on faith in network effects kicking in someday different from the celestial pastry exercise known as a Ponzi scheme? Venture capitalists feared industry-wide for their rapacity were observed to surface from pitch sessions with open wallets and leaking eyeballs, having been subjected to nerd-produced videos with subliminal messages and soundtracks featuring oldie mixes that pushed more buttons than a Speed Freak with a Nintendo 64. Who was less innocent here?
Yeah, really, really great stuff that is really pinch on speaking directly in the way that we've been kind of talking for the past 5 or so minutes.
Yeah.
And it's on top of all of that, on top of the concrete social criticism, it's also just really nice to see kind of a return of the kind of what's his name? Stanley Kotek's complaining about
good point.
Losing the identity of it being an inventor, and seeing exactly how this is slightly different, these people know what's going on, at least well enough to have some real culpability. It's not just like propaganda saying Edison was an inventor. If you try hard, you can be just like him. Most of these hackers know that these venture capitalists were on some level scammers and on some level like as close to evil as anybody ever gets. And they did it anyway because they thought that they could outmaneuver them.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of one of the other things we brought up in the last episode, the California sort of as evil empire stuff that I wrote down as this kind of backstory sort of continues. We have the quote. I was in California once. I gotta say, you go out there expecting all these howdy there types. It comes as a shock. Talk about entitled, suspicious. Nobody here in the alley is about to snoot you the way you get snooted by those folks in Marin. Oh, I'm sorry, you're not well people, are you? I like that quote is in there. One of the Sandhill firms is literally called fucking Voorhees Kruger, which is about as clearly on its face what Pynchon is talking about as possible. And especially going back to the Stanley Kotex example, like there's two things that California is kind of known for outside of like the movie industry. There's the venture capital and Silicon Valley stuff, and then fucking defense contracting companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, SpaceX, Raytheon. Like all of them are in Los Angeles. So just sort of like this like slow buildup of perversion, because like Boeing and Lockheed Martin, right, are companies that probably, I don't know the history of how they started, but probably started just building airplanes, and now they also make missiles, and they make all this other like terrible stuff that is used for less than I guess we'll say altruistic purposes in the world.
Well, I mean that's the bulk of their money. Boeing doesn't care about making airplanes anymore. That's abundantly clear. Yeah,
absolutely. And all of that is headquartered in this one place that Pynchon has clearly grown such a contempt to that he left and went back to New York, where he's creating this dichotomy between where these two stoner computer programmer guys who are clearly into the John Perry Barlow stuff wanted to be. I love the quote on 72 as well, where it says, they thought what they needed was a grim, unforgiving workplace where the summer actually ended once in a while and discipline was given a daily condition. By the time they found out the truth that the alley was as much of a nut ward as the valley, it was too late to go back. Like even in that case, he's still saying that, like, some of this stuff, yeah, you can have great intentions going into it, but it doesn't change the fact that for any of this to be successful, it requires these sort of tendrils of evil that all spiral out from the same place. And if you're going to have to make a deal with it, you might as well be closer to it than further away for your own convenience, if nothing else.
Yeah. Well, and to piggyback on that, I especially like the line just before that where it says the partners checked out as legit, maybe even innocent. Like, even though you can be cleared of like any major wrongdoing, you're not 100% in the clear, especially with guys like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, I think there's a lot of really great writing on just those 2 pages, 71 and 72.
Yeah.
I also love that it's pretty obvious that Pynchon watched Office Space at least a couple of times, because
sure,
that whole idea of hacking into the payroll and no one noticing it to steal money, that's Office Space right there, which if I'm not mistaken is also based on something that really happened.
Is it? I didn't know that.
I think it is. I think Mike Judge based that on somebody who actually was doing that.
Right. Good for that guy.
And then there's another Office Space reference that comes in a little later with I think it's Verva has a Office Space themed mug. Yeah, I believe my stapler is on her mug. So.
Yep.
If you somehow haven't watched Office Space, there's a good one to watch for that kind of ties into this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I mean, even further to the Kotex stuff that you brought up, Will, further up on 73 before the quote I read earlier, where it says, if content was still king, they got nonetheless a crash course in a patriarchal subtext, cutthroat jostling among nerd prices, dark dynastic histories. Before long, they were showing up in trade journals, on gossip sites, at Courtney Pulitzer's downtown soirees. finding themselves at 4 a.m. drinking Calixmatos in a bar's carpentered into ghost stops on abandoned subway lines, flirting with girls whose fashion thinking including undead signifiers such as custom fangs installed out in the outer boroughs by cut-rate Lithuanian orthodontists. Which that's pretty much right there as far as the naivety to learning about the cynical underbelly of everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's really great. It's really great, and so much of it is enforced by real history in a way that, again, I feel like some of his other books isn't so clearly in your face about that, because Courtney Pulitzer's Downtown Soirees is a real thing. There's a whole history you can read about all of that. And a lot of this stuff is just more out in the open as far as something that you can research rather than needing to have, knowledge of something maybe esoteric or more difficult to get into, especially at the time that some of those older books were published. So that does bring us to when Maxine logs into Deep Archer. I would imagine we have a lot of thoughts on this scene of her going through sort of the splash screen and on her train journey. What did we think about this?
What a beautiful piece of writing that is. I mean, genuinely, like, that was when I went over that, I immediately just stopped and highlighted it and then went back and reread it, and it's breathtaking. I think for anyone, to circle back on what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, like for anyone thinking that he's lost his ability to write the way he used to, this paragraph should serve as an indication that he absolutely has not.
Yes, 100%. Definitely. Yeah, it's so beautifully written, and I love the fact that it opens with this sort of history. Will, do you want to read the paragraph starting with originally the guys on page 74?
Sure. Originally the guys, you have to wonder how presciently, had it in mind to create a virtual sanctuary to escape to from the many varieties of real-world discomfort. A grand-scale motel for the afflicted. A destination reachable by virtual Midnight Express from any place with a keyboard. Creative differences arose, to be sure, but went strangely unacknowledged. Justin wanted to go back in time to a California that had never existed, safe, sunny all the time, where in fact the sun had never set unless somebody wanted to see a romantic sunset. Lucas was searching for some place you could say a little darker, where it rains a lot and great silences sweep like wind, holding inside them forces of destruction. What came out of synthesis was Deep Archer.
And I love that intro paragraph to the experience that Maxine has over the course of page 75, 76, and kind of into 77, because that sort of is a perfect descriptor of what this passage reads like. This kind of like very peaceful, idyllic, but still maybe strange and just a little bit dark from a standpoint of its uncanny nature is exactly how these portions read. Which to get to your point, Cody, like, yeah, it's an illustration of just how freaking talented he still is at writing, and how he can telegraph that feel and then nail it exactly in what he puts forth to the reader.
Yeah, it's an absolutely mesmerizing section to read, and it's I think we could probably spend a good deal of time talking about these last several pages of this chapter, because there's really so much that goes on. But yeah, it's a really, for what's happening for Maxine, this immersion into the Deep Archer world, in the hands of a lot of other writers, could be done well, sure, but I think he has this ability to at the same time immerse the reader into that world as well. So you're really getting sucked into that world with her and going on that, really diving into that world and experiencing it. And especially when it gets later into it and she starts realizing, like the whole process of looking back and everything, which we'll get into. It's so wonderful.
Yeah, to indulge in some, I guess you'd call it meta commentary. There's an annoying thing where people seem to believe that, film or novels or any kind of medium that is not inherently multimedia cannot meaningfully capture at least some aspect of what it is like to be on the internet. Like that's not an uncommon point of conversation in online reading discussion forums.
True.
And for anybody who has read this book in the past and is for some reason not rereading this and therefore obviously getting their own re-education done, learning how this book is not a pile of garbage. Any of you I'm gonna not say the word I mean to say. Any of you out there who went online and talk about, well, it really seems like Pynchon, reading these parts about Deep Archer, it's like reading my grandfather's idea of what the internet is like.
Silly.
No.
Yeah.
What this is somebody who recognizes that experience is not the same as the thing in and of itself.
Mhm.
This is a great way to capture the kind of experience of like a Wikipedia rabbit hole sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like it really captures a lot about the subjective experience of loading up a game for the first time in that first expository paragraph about the splash screen, and later on that very tangible like what's next, even though there isn't any description of what is on the screen during those segments.
Yeah, completely. Couldn't have said it better myself. And I love the depiction when this whole thing kind of ends, where she doesn't even realize how much time has passed. Like it's already night, and they're like, I think it's time for you to log off. And they have reasons for that, as we'll talk about shortly. But just that's very true. Like to your point, Will, about being in a rabbit hole or getting into that like mindset of like what's next. Like it is so easy to lose yourself in that. And we're talking about a virtual reality space in 2001. It's not going to look amazing by modern graphical standards, but that still was very much the experience that people had playing Second Life. That game ruined several marriages.
Yeah.
And
several is an understatement.
And people's like functional life, and people sold their fortunes for in-game items in fucking Second Life. Like it is exactly like that. And I can't remember who said it, but this quote basically goes something along the lines of the fact that like humans are already cyborgs in some degree. It's why when you step into a car, you kind of feel that your body is larger than it is. You can kind of feel the dimensions of the car in relation to other things. And then when you step into these virtual spaces, even if they're not rendered, picture perfect accurate to the modern world, it still is enough for the way that our brains work to give itself over to that for as long as we possibly can before either something else comes along where we have to stop because we have prior commitments, or because suddenly you realize that the room is dark and actually you've been here, for the last 6 hours. It is a very, very accurate descriptor of what these things are like.
And to kind of bring these diffuse themes together, I really have to wonder how much Pynchon was thinking about things like Stumble Upon, which
sure,
conveniently was founded in November 2001.
Yeah.
Like, and how much he was trying to predict. As we know, he has a bit of a penchant for prediction, but also just like it's kind of straightforward how much you would expect to see something like nowadays we have TikTok. What is TikTok if not this but automated? You don't even have to click.
Yep. Yeah. And for TikTok to have fucking ads that show up that say it's time for you to go to bed, TikTok will be here tomorrow, is one of the most terrifying things I think in the modern social media landscape. I used TikTok for maybe about a day, and what got me to get off of it was getting one of those ads and then realizing that it was 1 a.m. and I was like, oh, this is
Jesus.
not something that I can this is not something that I can allow in my life. I need to get rid of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, personally, when YouTube added the autoplay thing, that's you know, to appropriate a pretty toxic term, that's when I got blackpilled on social media.
Sure, that's fair.
Like that was the moment where all of these things clicked for me back in like 2014 or whenever that happened. It was just
Yeah.
like, oh my god, what the fuck? What
Well, and
people want to
it's-
sit here and just watch the things go by?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
think
and
it's interesting that. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, and that's getting back to the venture capital aspect of it, and like the hyper capitalism stuff that you brought up earlier, Cody. When you cannot squeeze any more money out of something because something like YouTube or Google or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it might be is inherently a limited platform from a standpoint of its monetary worth, it becomes about time invested, and it becomes about like, we need to come for every second of their day. We need to keep them watching for as long as possible to squeeze more revenue out of it, merely by showcasing how long people are on these platforms for. And you're right, like TikTok was sort of an experiment in what are these people that I'm working with talking about, because my black pill was somewhat similar. It was prior to YouTube autoplaying stuff. It was rather, Jesus Christ, how much time have I spent on YouTube this past week, and how much stuff have I not done as a result of that? Was the moment that I had of it. But it's becoming more automated and easier, where you don't have to have that thought process, because it's just in this like permanent cycle of dopamine now, whether it's YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think what's interesting is that the generation that really kind of came of age when all this was starting up, which my generation, I was Facebook came out right around the time I was graduating high school.
Yeah.
And so we were the generation that really, were the early users of it, and the ones who were initially getting on there. And now we're also the ones who are very quickly getting away from it as quickly as possible. And the ones who are coming back to it and staying on it and really engaging on it are our parents. And it's frightening to see. And I think this kind of ties into the book with, the sort of bastardization of these things, especially online things, how they initially start as, we're going to do this is what this is for. This is what MySpace is for. We're trying to connect people. We want people to find each other and stay connected. Facebook, the same thing. Like when you move on from high school, you want to be able to stay in touch with the people that you grew up with. And it has become so much worse in just a short amount of time, as we have, as you were talking about, Kate, like engagement has become the commodity, and the goal is exactly as you said, to keep people on as long. The longer you keep them on, the more money you make from them. Whether they don't have to buy. That's the most frightening thing about it, is you don't have to buy anything anymore. You just have to engage with whatever platform it is you're on, and take in all these ads and whatever else it is, and that's how they get their money. And it's it is really, really disturbing, and it doesn't seem like there is an end point in sight. I think it just morphs into whatever's next. And I that's what's really frustrating about it, is because really and truly, and this is what the people who were laying the groundwork for the internet were trying to do, like, there is a lot of potential for good things to be done online. The dissemination of information free to the masses should be the priority of that. But it has become so corrupted and just horribly distorted from that. And it's become such a behemoth. It is essentially a Lovecraftian entity at this point. And I don't think there is an end in sight that we're going to distance ourselves from that. I think it's going to take another major horrible event to crash that down. And it scares the hell out of me, really.
Yeah, and to kind of there's so many directions that I could go off on this. One would be to tell everyone to read Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, because a lot of that and a lot of his writing as it relates to entertainment consumption and its effect on your ability to actually be happy is a big chunk of that book, and sort of what he was writing about in the late 90s. But to use a real world example of what you're talking about, Cody, of this is the internet was made for connection, was made for, you know, the dissemination of good things. I think that the best thing that I can think of is the fact that, you know, there was a very real period around the time that this book was published where we thought that like Facebook was going to free the Middle East from from governmental oppression, and like talking about, you know, like the WASP apparatus, like Henry Luce at Time Magazine chose like the protester as the person of the year one year, over all of the different Arab Spring protests that were aided by social media, or what people were trying to say was the big deal, was that social media was aiding those protests. When you go back to the real history of that, a lot of these protests were necessary because the evil empire of America put these countries in those positions where a revolution was necessary in the first place.
Yeah.
And, you know, to tie this back into Bleeding Edge, you end up with before social media, this idea of watch time being monetized started with 9/11 and the advent of the 24-hour cable news network cycle.
CNN and MSNBC and all that, yeah.
Like really before 9/11, news was like 2 hours a night on most channels.
You
and
had
then
your
like
morning news and your nightly news. And that was pretty much it.
Exactly. And then suddenly they realized that we can turn this into an all-day thing if we can get people to watch it. And 9/11 was the first big thing where they were able to do that. And then it just became about, how do we keep people watching? Well, let's get more inflammatory hosts on the air. Let's get weird debate shows where one of them is wearing a fucking bow tie and they're killing America. And then that guy later gets his own show on Fox News where he poisons the souls of America's geriatrics and impressionable, you know, young people that then go back to Facebook where QAnon spreads through and makes it even worse. And then there's a fucking insurrection on January 6th. And then off the back of that, we play that footage on TV for days, like the towers collapsing. But like it all fits into this evil, vicious cycle that started from a seed germ of something positive.
Well, and to just, I'm going to do some token pushback here. Just because I think technically, if you're going to draw the beginning of the 24-hour news cycle, it's actually like O.J. Simpson and the Clinton impeachment trials.
That's fair, yeah.
But what 9/11 gave us was this idea of it being important to be engaged.
Yeah, there you go.
It's the shift in attitude and the exploitation of that attitude that came out of ultimately just like people being like, did Bill Clinton abuse his intern? Did O.J. Simpson really just get in his Bronco and drive? And, you know, 10 years later, am I missing something in this looping clip of this plane hitting this building? What am I not understanding?
Mm-hmm.
The kind of collapse of all sorts of engagement, from intellectual to emotional to literal engagement, collapsing into just watch it, just see it, be there. Don't miss the context, whatever that is. That's the step that makes it horrible, even if it's not evil per se.
Yeah. Well, and that's where he brings it all to a head point, is with the mention again of entropy on page 77, when he talks about who can afford bandwidth like this. She mouses her way to the back of the car, expecting grand vistas of trackscape receding, only to find instead emptiness, absence of color, the entropic dwindling into netscape gray of the other brighter world, as if any idea here of escaping to refuge would have to include no way back. That's exactly what that's what we became after. I think you're exactly right. Well, I think the O.J. Simpson and I'm sorry, I forgot the other.
Bill Clinton.
Clinton thing. I think that was the groundwork for that. I think that was the kind of testing of like, there's something here we can, maybe we can make this longer. It needed a bigger event, and they got that bigger event, and that's when it really became what it became. And so now, if when we stay engaged like that, there is no looking back. You're stuck, always looking at everything that's going on, always going further down the rabbit hole into the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, for that fear of missing out on whatever it is that might be next, and you lose the perspective of everything else around you to the point where you just there's nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. And I think that like to bring this sort of back to the close of chapter 7, I think the fact that when they kind of interrupt Maxine's fever dream of going through Deep Archer, it isn't just out of a standpoint of like, oh, she's been wired in for a while, but also from the standpoint of like, we don't know who's watching. And bringing back that like that sinister undercurrent of like, someone's trying to buy the freaking source code. They don't want the game. They want the source code, and they could be hacking in to steal it. I'm not going to spend the next 5 hours talking about Promise Software and Inslaw, but I could. Like, and going into that fact that within this chapter in that section, like Thomas Pynchon is bringing that to the forefront of like, the longer that this is out there, the more gates we're giving people to access it, and that builds upon this sort of suspense that he's setting up over these couple of chapters to drive the narrative plot forward too. Of like, yeah, you had this experience, let's shut it off now because we don't know who's watching, we don't know who's trying to get here, we don't know who's trying to potentially steal this, and that gets into some of the deep web stuff that has been brought up a little bit so far in the book.
Yeah, and I think to go back to what Will mentioned when we were talking about the chapters in general, I think if you're not hooked by this point, I don't know what to tell you, because I mean the stakes are set at this point.
Right.
We're getting an idea of the powers that be and what they're capable of, and the real and imminent danger that they are proving to be. And again, this kind of goes to if you look back at like Vineland and Brock of the unseen entity that's lurking back there, and the threat that they pose growing as we get through the book. This is this is that again. This is we haven't seen Gabriel Ice. We don't know who he really is or what he's fully capable of at this point, but we're getting these breadcrumbs are getting closer and closer together, and it's leading us towards so much more, and the tension is ratcheting up. I love this chapter.
Yeah, it's a great chapter, and this is why I call this book his second Bible. It isn't quite the same as Gravity's Rainbow being a Bible in its encyclopedic nature, but from a standpoint of what we've just spent maybe 20 minutes talking about off the back of this character playing a video game, and how all of that, when really put in context of why it's present in the narrative and what Pynchon is driving at, it gets to a lot of real world issues, both socially, politically, and economically. It is a Bible that is maybe more realistic in its presentation. Gravity's Rainbow has those elements with the military industrial complex breaking logic and science in its expanse and scope, and the kind of experimental elements of that book trying to make that point with its expansion, whereas this one is a bit more grounded in the day-to-day personhood reality of they don't need rockets anymore. They can do this in much different ways, and with no warfare necessarily if they want to.
Yeah. It's Gravity's Rainbow was a lot more abstract in the way it approached that kind of idea, and Bleeding Edge it definitely feels more like Pynchon is holding this book in front of us, being like, look, I'm showing you right now what's going to happen, like where this is going. It much more, not only in a closer time frame, but in a much more, as you said, a more grounded and realistic approach and setting. And it's fitting that this is his last book for that reason. I think there's, as you've mentioned, I think several times at this point, Kate, like there's really nothing else for him to say. Obviously there is, because there's more of the book to go through,
Yeah.
But this is it. Like, this is we live in this time. We are existing as this is happening. Essentially, yes, we're 10 years removed from the publishing of this book and 20 plus from when it takes place, but we're in that generation.
Mm-hmm.
And that should really hit home a lot harder because of that.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. As a minor note, there is a mention here of something called Penet Fi. For those listeners or readers who do not know, Penet Fi was a remailer, and a remailer is essentially a way of reposting something or resending something from one server to another. Pennant was big because it was pseudonymous. All the users of it had their identities completely protected. It was actually at one time, to go into like conspiracy territory, accused of being 75 to 90% of the distribution of child pornography, though this was disproven quickly afterwards in court. Eventually, Penet Fi was actually shut down in 96 due to legal pressure by the Church of Scientology. There was a guy who was using Penet Fi to remail church like documents and materials in an effort to kind of discredit some of the weirder aspects of the Church of Scientology, and they got him for copyright infringement because technically the material was copyrighted. And so before the cases could really be like adjudicated in court, the founder of Penet Fi just decided that he would rather shut it down, despite the fact that it still had a very, very active user base. And again, that's going from a guy just wanted a peer-to-peer sort of reposting service for people who wanted to remain anonymous. And whether you want to claim that stealing copyright from the Church of Scientology is a moral evil or not, it gets corrupted and co-opted and dragged into something that it really had no interest in being accused of by the end of it. So that's just some additional context for what's at the end of the chapter, which just go back to kind of some of the origins of departure. So again, Pynchon making these real world connections to these ideas of like something being used for good and ending up getting shut down or changed or accused of something significantly different.
Yeah, and I mean, normally I would find this kind of lamp shading a little bit frustrating to put a capstone on a chapter, but I do think it's pretty creative that the last like paragraph and 2 lines of this chapter can be viewed very directly as a pun on the end of history.
Sure, yeah.
Where they have this discussion of you're dowsing for transparent links, each measuring 1 pixel by 1, each link vanishing and relocating as soon as it's clicked on, an invisible self-recoding pathway, no chance of retracing it. But if the route in is erased behind you, how do you get back out? Click your heels 3 times, Lucas says, and oh no, wait, that's something else. And I mean, I think obviously that's not how you get out of just to go back to another example of this phenomenon, a Wikipedia rabbit hole. You just close the window and you walk away, and at the same time, what it's getting at is a very real issue. Since 9/11, a lot has been said, especially in the past 5 years or so, about the way that Western culture, as it's framed usually, has stagnated so intensely since 23 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that isn't because, people get trapped in Wikipedia rabbit holes, and maybe it isn't literally because you're sitting there watching the news and so you forget what was on 10 days ago. But it on at least an artistically, thematically interesting level, it all does tie together there, and I do think it's about perfect, despite normally disliking that tactic.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I almost feel like chapter 7 could really be read on its own as just sort of like a short story essay about like the all of the themes that we're kind of talking about.
I mean, it really is a pretty good summation of what the book is getting at as a whole.
Yeah. Agreed. Anything else on chapter 7 before we move on to 8?
Doing some math real quick here. Give me a second.
Uh-oh.
So fun.
Am I going to have to do math? Because I'm not good at it.
Neither am I. I was not a math girly. Though I want it to be.
He's honed in.
He's wired in over there.
No, honestly, I got in the habit a while ago of using the Python CLI as a calculator, and it is currently broken on my computer.
What is it you're trying to run numbers on?
And it doesn't matter. I just wanted to see if it lined up with a nice even fraction, like he tends to do in his books, where like the Pulchler chapter of Gravity's Rainbow is right around the 60% mark, and a later central event to this book happens at exactly like 66% of the way through. Anyway.
Okay.
No, this is 15% in, which if I was a little bit more up on my music theory, maybe there's some connection there, because usually there's some kind of harmonic joke with those things, but nope.
All right, so that brings us to chapter 8, where Maxine meets up with Reg again, where Reg now admits that he is also being followed. So it's not just Maxine; it's also the man who brought this whole shitstorm to Maxine's doorstep, I guess is maybe how I'll describe it. Where his friend is still looking underneath the surface at Ice's company, as he talks about, and he starts getting into the concept of Hawala. Is this something that you guys were aware of prior to reading this book?
Nope, but I know about it now.
Okay, so
yeah, not by name, but
I wrote out a diagram using the podcast's host's name, which I'll explain. So Hawala is a way in the Islamic world of sending money to people. Basically, it is oftentimes maligned as a way for, funding terrorism or for money laundering or, XYZ, which I'm sure it has been used for, but it is apparently just a part of how, social structures over there work as it relates to money. So how a Hawala would work. Let's say that I really wanted to send money to Cody, but I didn't want that money traceable. I would call Cody or contact him somehow, and I would give him a password. Say, like, I'll just say pineapple is the password. And then I go to Luke, and I basically tell Luke, the password is pineapple, and also here's $100,000 in US currency. I want this money to make its way to Cody, but in euros. Luke will then send the instructions on the money transfer side of it, changing the money into euros, as well as the password. And then Will contact Cody, and Cody will give Will the password. And if that password, if pineapple matches up to what he received from Luke, then he gives the money in euros to Cody. And so I have, in effect, paid Cody that money. And then typically the two sort of go-betweens, so in this example, Luke and Will, they'll settle up accounts with one another as far as what they're owed at different intervals, rather than it being done all at once. So that's how the kind of financing scheme that Pinchon is talking about here actually runs. And we learn that this is something that Gabriel Ice is engaging in Dubai, of all places, to send money over there for something. We'll obviously learn about this at a later date. And he has figured this out through the careful installation of a Furby that was left in the offices, which is something that I think probably made me laugh harder than anything else so far in this book. Just the idea that you would use a Furby to engage in surveillance on a corrupt company is just probably the most 2001 thing I've ever heard.
It's grounded in reality, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, like it's not something that he's just making up. It is something that people did and was a concern.
The NSA was concerned about it as he was concerned.
Yes, yeah. It's hilarious, but we learned that Hashslingers is using a Hawala system to get money out of the country, and when Maxine asks where it's going, he says the following thing: over to the Gulf, as it turns out. This particular Hawala is headquartered in Dubai. Plus, Eric has been finding that to even get to where Hashslinger's books are stashed, they put you through elaborate routines written in this like strange Arabic that he calls Leet. It's all turning into a desert movie. For those of you who don't know, here's some real world history going back to the non-conspiratorial. Okay, I'm not going to say non-conspiratorial. The non-out there conspiratorial elements of 9/11. For those who don't know, over half of the 9/11 hijackers flew out of Dubai to get to America. And the banks in the United Arab Emirates were used to clean and flush money from overseas to them very often. It was used for money payments and distribution for the hijackers through their entire sort of training and readying process. Interestingly enough, the UAE also had the only airlines that flew commercially for the Taliban and Al Qaeda. So when the Taliban was in charge of Afghanistan, as it was in 2001, Dubai was one of the only actual airports that would fly members of the Taliban sort of to where they maybe needed to go for sort of government operations. And along with that, Al Qaeda as well. Now, if we move further into the conspiratorial elements of this, more interestingly, there was a Malaysia summit. This is very famous, where 9/11 was supposedly planned by all of the people that kind of put this in motion. And this Malaysia summit was actually heard about and surveilled by the CIA. One of the key planners of 9/11 at this summit was a man named Khalid al-Midhar. He traveled through Dubai to get to the United States. He was one of the hijackers who did that. And the CIA somehow obtained his passport while he was there, as well as all of his visas, and they were photocopied. One of those visas that they photocopied showed that he had a multiple entry visa for the USA, and they already knew that he had been at this Malaysia conference. Now, the CIA told nobody about this. And if you've read The Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright or watched the miniseries that came out on Hulu a couple years ago, this aspect of the story is very crucial to kind of the narrative in that book of sort of 9/11 as a result of a intelligence sharing failure between the CIA and the FBI. They had this information and they did nothing. Neither the FBI or the INS were informed, and they weren't told that al-Midhar was going to be in the country. They were not told that he had a multiple entry visa. They were not told that he was at the Malaysia summit. So he just went to Florida and continued to put the plans to make 9/11 happen. He was just able to do that in peace with no interruption. So the question that a lot of people have always asked is, why was he stopped at the airport? How did the CIA have access to him at the airport and his documents? And why wasn't he a known terrorist before then? Why was he allowed to fly out if the CIA had a presence there? Why wasn't it shared? All of that stuff. So Dubai being the place that Hashslingers is sending money to, with everything that's going to happen later in the book, has very real world resonance and importance to sort of the conspiratorial element of what's being set up here. So going from there, we learn about this whole offshore angle. It seems as though ICE is looking to make sort of a bundle of cash out of the region. We don't entirely know why, but we do know that he has naval contracts. There is also a pretty up there quote from one of the previous chapters that we've already gone through, as it relates to there being a potential conflict for Desert Storm 2, because Bush wants to outdo his father. And so they kind of go through this conversation with this continually ratcheting paranoia, I'll say, that both of them are experiencing until, wow, that was a really loud motorcycle. So yeah, their paranoia is ratcheting up as a result of this. They're talking about how maybe they should get out of town. Reg is asking if she still keeps a weapon on her. And this is just one of those elements of the book that is really effective in how it is portraying that hard-boiled investigatory angle. Just this idea that the two of them are experiencing that, like, there's something much bigger than we anticipated going on here, and maybe it would be better if we didn't get ourselves involved. But at the same time, we're kind of in too deep at this point to pull out, and that kind of investigator who needs to know the truth, who needs to get to the bottom of the case, is certainly present in Maxine through all of this. And Maxine wants to set up a conversation with Eric. And then there's an interesting quote here where it says, is she thinking about Hawala, Hashlingers, even Reg's personal safety? Actually, no. It's that Deco derivative shuttle terminal of Lucas and Justin's that might or might not get her access to Deep Archer. So even in the midst of all of this, like incredibly heavy conspiratorial elements that she's experiencing in real time, the ever-present danger that she's being followed, that her kind of partner is being followed in all of this investigation, she's still thinking about the computer game. Like it's that much of it sort of in infection in her mind at this point of a desire to get back to it, of a desire to continue on. So speaking to sort of the rabbit hole and the kind of technological like cycle of addiction and reward and all of that, it's still being present there, even though she only spent one night there. Any thoughts on this scene before we move on?
To piggyback off what you just said, the internet of Bleeding Edge is the television of Vineland.
Yes.
That's the immersive thing that has people unable to break away and experience the reality of the world outside of that, and is allowing the powers that be to continue doing what it is they're doing to further their own interests and do what they want to do. The other thing, I do want to take a minute to really appreciate the hard-boiled and noir writing that's in this chapter, because it is something else. Especially, I love this part at the end of 80 and the beginning of 81. Let's see. I start looking under the surface at ISIS company. Next thing I know, I'm being followed. Now they're following you. You want to tell me there's no connection? I shouldn't be freaking out in fear of my life or anything. With a suspended court also about to resolve. I love that.
It's good, yeah.
And there's so much more of, like you were saying, the back and forth between Maxine and Reg, and
it's so good.
It really, like, as someone who and I've brought this up so many times, I love hard-boiled and noir stories, like detective novels and detective short stories. I absolutely love that stuff, and to see it done in a loving and really endearing manner, like you can tell that Pynchon genuinely loves that genre too, and treats it with such reverence and still makes it his own. It really, really adds such a cool element to the way this story is told.
Yeah, agreed. It's like a more competent Doc and Owen Wilson's character Coy, like
Coy,
their conversations. Yeah.
yes. There's like out on the docks in the fog. Yeah, except this is in small rooms with computers and it's so cool. I love it.
It's excellent.
Yeah,
I agree.
To jump off of that, I guess one of the hallmarks of noir as an evolution out of simple like pulp detective fiction is the very conscientious use of obscurantism for the narrator, and in particular the idea that like the detective is going around stereotypically LA or San Francisco and is aware of the corruption all around him, aware of the tit for tat and the quid pro quo that's happening, but they're also like massively racist and or misogynistic. And oftentimes the authors were just racist and misogynistic, but in probably just as many cases, especially post 40s, it was a very self-conscious choice to say, hey, even this guy is limited in terms of his perspective. Even this guy is Even this hero who's rough talking, sure, but he gets his job done and he's doing something important and he's helping people along the way, even if he's breaking some poor black boy's teeth halfway through the book.
Yeah.
And to contradict what we spent a lot of the opening of this episode talking about, something that I think at this point I have to mention is the fact that it's pretty clear that the one semblance, or the remaining semblance of Pynchon's like writing for the sake of lying to the reader, I guess, is in that Maxine does not trust Arabs. And she's not outwardly bigoted, and she doesn't think less of them. But this entire first half of this chapter, they're talking about Hawala. They're talking, Reg is talking about Sharia-compliant workarounds like Arboon auctions. Well, sure, Hawala is, like, in terms of practice, pretty convoluted, and therefore it's an opportunity for corruption or scamming. But fundamentally, all it is acting as like a wire transfer.
Yeah, essentially.
It is literally an unregulated wire transfer.
Yeah,
that's all it is.
Yeah, there's nothing inherently dangerous about it. And an Arboon auction is just, it's like buying something on layaway or like pawning. They're not actually sinister, but the way they're discussed in the book frames everything as something to be worried about. And in this particular context, that's justified. But it reveals a lot about kind of what it implies that, sure, Maxine might just be distracted because she was really into Deep Archer, but also the onion routing that Deep Archer essentially is built upon is very similar to the very similar to the structure of things like Hawala. The reasons why her mind is dwelling on it is not just that kind of seed of addiction, but it is also, in this case, it's a very real signal of commonality between these things, and she can't see that because of that underlying small b bigotry.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So another one of my favorite quotes from chapter 8 is the opening paragraph after the page break on 84, where it says, among Maxine's more useful sensors is her bladder. When she's out of range of information she needs, she can go whole days without any particular interest in pissing. But when phone numbers, koans, or stock tips from which she's likely to profit are close by, the gotta go alarm has reliably steered her to enough significant restroom walls that she's learned to pay attention. Just another great moment of like her intuition, her like ability to, go on these important sort of investigatory missions or her self-possession. I just love the way that it's described there. And in this particular instance of needing to use the bathroom, she runs into this Greasy Spoon diner in the Flatiron District where she runs into Lucas, and Lucas has just broken up with a woman and has asked her to go down to the basement into the bathroom and speak to her. It's a woman named Cassidy. What do we think of this scene?
Definitely paints a pretty shitty picture of Lucas, for sure.
Yeah.
It's again, this is a great hard-boiled detective scene where starting with that that intuition that the detective has and following up on that, and then going for this following that to where it leads, finding a person that you're actively working with or need to be working with, which leads to another person that you end up gleaning really good information from when you didn't expect to get information after going through this, what is essentially a labyrinth of a restaurant just to find the bathroom. And it turns out that, you run into this person who used to work for Hagawa, and it shows us how awful Lucas really is. It's a great scene. I really enjoyed it. And there's a section in there that just the writing of when they're Maxine and God, what is her name?
Cassidy.
Cassidy, sorry, are sitting in stalls next to each other. That is just absolutely. I don't want to read it right now because I may pick that for my quote, or I don't know if either of you did, but it's beautifully written.
Yeah,
little section there.
it is. And in my book, when it says, "Yep," turns out when she first met Lucas, Cassidy was working for Hagawa. I literally wrote in the margin, "Paranoia alert."
Did you circle it also?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I mean, it also does go to show that a lot of these guys who seem altruistic or have altruistic goals in the things that they want to do are just as corrupt underneath. Yep. And just as messed up underneath. Again, if you watch We Live in Public, Josh Harris seems like a guy who has this idea for the democratization of sort of television and an idea of sort of a willing submission to the singularity, I guess is the best way that I would describe what he was sort of doing with Pseudo and with his We Live in Public experiments. And like his girlfriend, when the two of them lived together,
Jesus,
it was God. What a horrific cycle of abuse she endured as a result of that. And
that
then
was hard to watch. That really was.
Yeah. And then afterwards, Josh Harris to this day has tried to whitewash that whole thing, is that she was an actress playing his girlfriend and not his actual girlfriend. And, you know, Elon Musk could be another example of a guy who on the surface, I want to say maybe 10 years ago, people were talking about him like he was going to single-handedly drag the human race into the future. And look at what the public consciousness understands him to be now as a result of revelations. These people, much like their products, seem good on the surface, but often are just as corrupt as the rest of the institution underneath.
Yep.
Yeah, and I do love the fact that, you know, it would be kind of facile to leave it there, but having Justin be the kind of the counterpoint, who does seem, as far as I remember throughout the book, like a pretty upstanding guy. No one's perfect, but you know, he's not sleeping around with underage girls.
Right.
To have that counter example, just to point out the fact that the issue is not that all of these people are evil, but that there's no way to distinguish them outwardly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great point. And I love the end of this chapter. Like the fact that, you know, she learns all of this, speaks to her, and then you know, her response of just like, yeah, he's stealing my intellectual property. Then there's a reference to I designed it like that chick who did the tarot deck. That's real history, like the most popular tarot deck like for a very, very long time, if not still currently. The artist who drew all the pictures for that, she was paid nothing for all of the sales of that tarot deck. But just, yeah, after they're sort of done talking, and after she, once again, another paranoia alert brings up the fact that like the best thing for them all would be just if someone like Gabriel Ice bought it, which he's trying to do. There's this quote here that says, "Presently, through strange toilet ESP, the ladies emerge at the same time, same moment from their stalls, and have a look at each other. Maxine is not too surprised to find tats, piercings, hair of an orchid shade not on any map of the human genome, an age somewhat south of legal for anything. The way Cassidy's looking back, meanwhile, makes Maxine feel like Hillary Clinton or something. Can you check upstairs and see if he's still there? Happy to." She ascends into the murky bummer sphere again. Yes, he's still there. Starting to get worried about both of you. Lucas, she's 12, and you better start paying her royalties. Just the sheer rage that comes across in that closing paragraph and dialogue is just so effective. And I love the way that he closes that scene out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's excellent. Any more thoughts on chapter 8 before we move into 9?
Just that I do like the way that it's framed, that clearly this girl, why can't I find her name? It's
Cassidy.
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 Thank you, brain.
We're all forgetting it. Well, I am and you are.
Yep. Cassidy, you know, what I do like about it is that it does outline the way that in kind of going back to talking about the free love movement in Vineland, the way that like it can be entirely consensual and in general, in a general sense, fine for somebody to just make something for a project.
Mhm.
Like it really doesn't come across like Cassidy's mad that they're going to use her splash screen. She was just, you know, taking credit in the conversation. But at the same time, Maxine is aware of how power works. Maxine
Yes.
is aware of how money works.
She's older. She understands exactly
She's also
how to
a
kind of
fraud
manipulation.
investigator.
Exactly. She's older. She's been there, done that to some extent, because all of us have in some way. We've all been taken advantage of by an older, more capable person to some extent. And she's coming out of this bathroom knowing that at some point Cassidy's gonna regret the fact that she did this work for a for-profit project.
Mhm.
That she doesn't want her to come away from this feeling like she was used and abused as a romantic in quotes partner,
Right.
but also as a worker. Like, she knows that in hindsight it'll sting, even though in a slightly different scenario there would be absolutely nothing wrong with, you know, a 16-year-old making art for a project. But
It's a big butt.
it's right there, you know.
Mhm.
Maxine's right. She might not literally be 12, but she's 12, and you better start paying her royalties. It needs to happen, or it will bite you in the ass, Lucas, for so many reasons that would be justified.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's such an effective scene in like 2 pages. It does not take a lot of space up, but it works so well. So that brings us to chapter 9, and chapter 9 is another one of these cases where Pynchon is doing like his nested storytelling thing, because it starts with her getting a phone call, and then it tells the entire backstory of why she's getting the phone call, only to go back to the phone call to learn why she's getting the phone call.
Yeah.
And we learned that a long time ago she was contracted to do some fraud investigation work for Canada, and in particular a guy named Phipps Epperdew that she was looking into, which is just again a great, just such a good name. Love his names. Where she went up to Montreal to do a fraud investigation, and I love how we get to see another one of these just like quick look how smart this woman is. Look at the history she has investigating these things. Just over the course of a couple pages, we learn about sort of where she is at, the kind of investigator she is, and kind of get to see her do that detecting work to further underpin her character. There is also a pun in here. For those of us who speak French, I'm not one of them. I got this from the Pynchon wiki. A laundromat being called net in French would basically mean clean.
Yeah.
Because net is like common Canadian French for or Quebecois French for clean, which is great. But the other thing that I love in this section in particular is the quotes here. It says phantomware countermeasures. Wait, so you're supposed to be pro phantomware. What's with this counter? We build it, we disable it, you're frowning. We're beyond good and evil here. The technology, it's neutral. So this is when she finally finds the person she's supposed to be investigating with this fraud that the Canadian government's asked her to look into. And the reason I underlined these quotes is that this is not only what Pynchon does in Inherent Vice with the Golden Fang getting their customers coming and going. We're going to get them hooked on Smack, and then we're going to send them up to a retreat in Ojai that we own so that they can get off Smack. And then they're going to go to our dental offices to get their teeth replaced because they have no more calcium in their body from the Smack we sold them. And we're gonna get them at all levels of vertical integration here. But it does also apply to 9/11 and America's involvement with the Taliban in Afghanistan. The Taliban were built up by America to repel the Soviets. We sold them weapons. We sold them rocket launchers. Charlie Wilson's War, if you've seen that movie, that's all about the early stages of what we tried to do to supply these militia groups. And Osama bin Laden was a particularly powerful sort of tribal leader within the Taliban that was considered to be one of the best military leaders that we were supplying weapons to. And then after that, we wage war on them and we take them out. We're pro-Taliban, then we're anti-Taliban. We get them coming and going as this great monolithic force in the country. So just again, analyzing this idea of fraud from a different level, but then seeing how it affects other stuff, not to do with just this book, but also just what the government engages in and what these different companies engage in, and even these low-level sort of con artists are doing. It's just really incisive commentary from Pynchon across all levels.
Yeah, absolutely. I have nothing to add to that. That was very well put.
Also, go watch Johnny Mnemonic.
Oh yeah, Jesus, I had forgotten about that.
That's referenced in this section. Not necessarily a good movie, but
I was gonna say I don't think it's definitely not Keanu Reeves's best work to that point.
But an interesting one.
An interesting one nonetheless, but far from his best work at that point.
One of my favorite VHS packaging designs was the VHS sleeve for Johnny Mnemonic.
That man, yes.
Because there was a cutout in Keanu's forehead where you could see the tape reel when you slid the tape back into the sleeve. And so we learned that Maxine, this investigation she assisted with is complete, and she's going to be getting a payout for her services, and they're going to be sending the guy to jail. This is one case where tail 'em, nail 'em, and jail 'em would have been a more accurate slogan.
Yep.
But ironically, it takes place outside of the United States. Any thoughts on that scene before we move to the next one?
Just that Phip Sepperdu, it feels even more salient than most of the names. Like I don't know what it is about that one, because like I've been racking my brain since I read this chapter for the first time. I have no clue what the hell it could possibly be.
Yeah, I did some research too, and I couldn't find anything.
I couldn't either. I did also appreciate the name Felix Boingo, which was that's a fun one.
Yeah.
And I did like the mention of Cherchez le Geek, which is another throwback to the detective novels where it would always be Cherchez la Femme, look for the woman, because that was always the you would find your information from the femme fatale, and they would ultimately probably end up being the one that was the kind of linchpin to everything. And but now here it's look for the geek, look for the nerd.
Yep.
Well, and I really like that. I think the best translation of that, and I mean literally, like the best translation I think would be seek the geek.
Seek the that's
and I just
definitely better.
It's just a real Pynchon move to make that I don't know, it's not a pun. I don't know what you call it.
This is a joke, I guess.
Wordplay, yeah.
It's very good. Very, very Joycean.
True. Yeah. So Maxine's about to go to sleep, and probably one of the best like hard-boiled quotes from these 3 chapters is here, where it says, "To hope that this Hashlinger's project of his will not turn too horrible on him is to wallow in a warm tub of denial." Something. It's so like such a great line. Warm tub of denial. Something else is up. Reg knew exactly who to bring this ticket to. He read Maxine correctly, knew she could feel something like his own alarm at the perimeters of ordinary greed overstepped, the engines of night and contrived oblivion out on the tracks cranking up to speed. It's just so good.
I would even back that up in that the first sentence after that page break, tonight's descent into sleep is helical and slow.
Yeah.
Just that slow spiral into like finally falling. Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. And that quote in particular reminds me of Philip Marlowe, because
Yes.
like specifically the line about Reg knew exactly who to bring this to.
Yep.
Like Philip Marlowe gets in those situations in 75% of those books.
Yeah,
Where
maybe even more than that, really.
he's where someone else has a problem, and they're like, "Well, I know who's gonna definitely take care of it at dire physical consequences to himself, and I don't have to deal with it, and that's gonna be Marlowe." Which is why, speaking as a slight point, which is why I love the changed ending in the Long Goodbye movie versus the book, where
You're talking about the one that Altman did?
yes, yeah,
Okay.
where at the end of it, Marlowe decides to kill his friend instead of just sort of concluding the investigation. I just love that as like a piece of revenge for Marlowe for all of the shit that he has slung over the course of those books. And then in this one instance, he's able to kind of get some degree of retribution for it. Yeah, so they have a panicked phone conversation where Reg explains that there's a locked door that's supposed to be a bathroom at the Hashlinger's headquarters, but also I love the idea that this is like a weird tech startup company in the Silicon Alley days, and there's just a bunch of people walking around speaking Arabic, like just this strange contingent all over the office, and nobody is really commenting on it. And you know, I don't know if that's Pynchon trying to make a veiled reference to the fact that the 9/11 hijackers were fairly bold, I'll put it, in not hiding themselves. Like they were going to strip clubs and flight school, and like they weren't really doing much to conceal anything.
Yeah.
But just that image of these people just completely opposite from the rest of the people in this office is really interesting. And then we learn that this secret bathroom is actually a bunch of these particular Arab contingent of the office workers doing something with computers, just assembling some computers for something, and there's just all sorts of circuit boards and data cables running around the room for one reason or another. And not only did Reg get some footage of it that he can give to her, but he got spoken to by Gabriel Ice personally as a result of going in the room.
In a moment where if his heart didn't drop into the bottom of his chest, like,
oh yeah,
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I mean, how can you not think that that's the end of your life when you...
I mean, the moment he walks into that room, you know, he's like immediately just like, oh shit, I definitely should not be here.
Yeah.
And then to get called into Gabriel Ice's office, like, now I know I really shouldn't be here.
Yeah. Now I know that it's all over for me. Like,
and then to lie to his face is even like,
yeah, which is, ooh. Yeah. Do you want to read that? Do you want to read that quote from, well, more like An al-Hammam? That conversation between two of them?
Well, more like Ayan al-Hammam. Where's the toilet? One of them comes right over, cold, polite. You are looking for toilet, sir? There is some muttering, but nobody shoots at me. Did they see the camera? Hard to say. 5 minutes later, I'm summoned to the office of the big ice pick himself. First thing he wants to know is, did I get any footage of the room or the guys in it? I tell him no. I'm lying, of course. And he's like, because if you did get footage, you would need to give that to me. It was that need. I think like when the cops tell you need to step away from the car, that's when I started to get scared. Second thoughts about the whole fucking project, frankly. Just there's so much tension in that that little bit of story right there that is so palpable, and I love it. I love it.
Yeah, really, really, really good stuff. Next up, we have the arrival of Horst into the narrative.
Yeah.
This is just fun. Like it just feels like Pynchon's trying to lighten the mood after these last 3 chapters, by having Horst come back to the house, and just we get to kind of see his interaction with his kids, and it's, even though they're divorced, it's just very sweet. It's very warm and nice.
Yeah, it starts on that's a weird way to go into your exes. Again, are they actually divorced? I don't know. They're not together really anymore. So
they are. They are divorced, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a weird way to go into your ex-wife's house and just kind of hang out while she's in the shower. But I guess it shows a comfortability that they have with each other, which is good for the kids for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Maxine basically divorced him because he was, I guess, boring. Like,
yeah.
It didn't seem as though there was like really any infidelity. Like maybe the main problem in their relationship is Horst would just give her money instead of actually trying to solve any problems that they maybe had. So, I could see how that would potentially create a bit more of a warm, amicable nature to the relationship. And obviously she still has some degree of feeling for him, given that she was, it really kind of seems to not want anybody to be with her ex-husband.
Yeah. It kind of gets in the way of all that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I also eating ice cream with 2 spoons is something that I've never heard of someone do outside of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. Do either of you know what he means by mushing?
Okay. Yes, because
okay.
I do because I do it.
So you've eaten ice cream with 2 spoons?
No, not the 2 spoons part. That part got me because I don't understand how you would stabilize anything. No, but what I will do, like especially with vanilla ice cream, is I'll let it sit for like just a couple minutes, and then use the spoon to essentially turn it into like soft serve, and then I'll crumble up the Girl Scout Thin Mint cookies and drop those in there. Swirl them in. Yeah, that's a good time right there.
So you're doing.
So it's an advanced thawing technique.
Essentially this is proprietary ice cream technology that I have developed over several years.
All right, thank you for enlightening me. I appreciate it a lot.
The way that you said that's a good time right there.
It is a challenge. Try it.
Cody's got his own Cold Stone Creamery in his house.
I do. It's marble slab.
I get the whole, thawing it a bit. It's just something about the way it was framed as mushing as like the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like the word mooshing it up. That part unsettles me really much. But yeah, the 2 spoons, like it comes off as this like unhinged Edward Scissorhands situation where he's like, I don't know, because if it's no matter whatever vessel it's in, there's no control over it,
Is it an advanced pun on his name? Like, is that what it's supposed to be? Because now he's using spoons as a bill.
Oh my god, I don't know.
Oh my god,
I don't know. Maybe Jesus.
Oh, it's deeply funny.
Yeah.
No matter the type or degree of intentionality, it's deeply funny.
Do spoonbills moosh their food?
I don't know what you call using a beak other than mooshing.
I suppose that's fair. Yeah.
Stab if you're a heron, I guess.
Yeah, true. And I do love Horst's interaction with Ziggy and his sons. Like it's so nice and playful and just kind of warm. Like that interaction of how's that Jewish ass kicking? Oh, coming along, killed an instructor last week. Awesome. Yeah. I just love the lack of elaboration on that. Just killed an instructor. Then his dad just goes, "That's great. That's great job, son."
Or when Ziggy comes in and he's like, "Mom, who's that sleazebag? Let me guess, another blind date."
Yeah, exactly.
And Horst's reply is, "What, you again?"
And it's so the character building that's happening around Maxine in just these 2 pages is really, really, I mean, beautifully nuanced. From the start with like her reaction to Horst just sticking his head into the shower and explicitly leering at her, and just the way she brushes it off, to the kind of the way that it reveals that all of this sweetness is there, that in her relationship with him and in Horst's relationship with kids. It really, I mean, it shows that a lot of the things that we've been hearing about Horst are deeply embedded in that like self-imposed filter that most people after a breakup put between themselves and the person they used to be in a relationship with, of consciously being like, no, I don't I don't really love this guy.
You have to justify the breakup. Yeah.
Yeah, even if like the relationship did come to its natural endpoint, you know, you still have the desire and kind of need to do that to some extent, just to not live in constant fear that you made the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And here you see that, like, yeah, Horst is not just a lumbering oaf who doesn't have any context of emotions. He's just really flat.
Yeah. He's boring.
And it's sweet. It's a really sweet way to do all of that character building.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna jump ahead slightly to funny moments, because my favorite funny moment of this particular
I think I know exactly where you're
section
going
of
with this.
chapters is maybe my favorite pinch on joke of any of his books, if I'm being honest. Where it says, they are presently joined by Otis, the really picky one, still hungry because Virva's recipes tend toward the experimental, so even more takeout menus are added to the pile, and negotiations threaten to run well into the night, further complicated by Horst's rules of life, such as avoid restaurants with logos where the food is a face or wears a whimsical outfit. They end up, as always, ordering in from comprehensive pizza, whose menu of toppings, crusts, and formatting options runs to about the thickness of a Hammacher Schlemmacher catalog at holiday time, and whose delivery area arguably does not even include this apartment, requiring the usual Talmudic telephone discussion over whether they still will bring food to begin with. So there's so many great jokes in that paragraph, from Virva's recipes veering on the experimental to Horst's rules about where to order food from. But my favorite pinch on joke is the Talmudic telephone discussion.
Yeah.
Because as someone who is Jewish and practiced Orthodox Judaism for a good chunk of her life and has read the Talmud, let me tell you, if you don't know what the Talmud is, it is essentially a series of arguments about a commentary that is a commentary on a commentary of the Torah. Jewish people who read the Talmud read one page of it a day, because I'm pretty sure that if you weren't a rabbi, to read more than one page a day would probably fry a good chunk of the synapses in your brain. Because how reading the Talmud goes is you read a section from the Mishnah, which is providing a commentary on the Torah, and then you read some argumentation about whether or not the Mishnah was correct by some rabbis, and then you read a later argument between even more rabbis on the previous argument, which is itself technically an argument on the original biblical text. And just adding that into the background of a conversation about whether or not they can get pizza delivered is just, oh my God, it's so clever. It's so funny. It's such a great joke. And I mean, calling a place Comprehensive Pizza,
That's the part that killed me.
as an explanation of how big their menu is, oh man, it's so good. I love it so much.
And it sucks because this might be one of those jokes that gets lost on a lot of younger readers who are used to the conveniences of online food delivery now, where you can just have pretty much anywhere you can get food delivered there. But at this time, it literally was like, you know, you could call a place and place an order, but if you were more than like 2 blocks away, they're not going to bring it to you. There's no way in hell.
Yep.
Like, you were just shit out of luck. And if they did bring it to you, you were lucky if it got there in a reasonable amount of time. But you also, you had to keep these mountains of menus that you would get from there. And so you would just have this like Rolodex of different takeout menus you'd have to go through. So yeah, that scene, like, that shit hit real. And I didn't grow up in New York, but I have family that lived out there, and I've been out there a couple of times, and that's what it is. That's what it's like, or was.
Yeah, growing up in Chicago, we had this was very vivid of my childhood and kind of growing up in the era this book is set in. We had a menu drawer of just menus from different places, and I have a vivid memory of the first my first girlfriend I lived with when I moved out and was like in my own place, not in Chicago, mind you. It was when I'd moved to Wisconsin, and she was like, "Why do you just have 68 menus in here?" for various local restaurants. And I felt so weird and old in that moment. Because this was after like food delivery had become like a thing in a more modernized context. And but I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Oh man.
So and to connect this to the youth, just an important piece of cultural context here, which is, what I'm going to say is not, I don't think is going to be introducing a new atom of information to anybody's knowledge, but this is firmly post Nun Pizza Left Beef.
Yes.
Nun Pizza Left Beef was 2007. This was written with that in mind. If his degree of engagement with other pop cultural phenomena are anything to go on, Pynchon knew about that. And the Hammacher Schlemmer catalog at holiday time as contrast to the radio buttons.
Oh my god.
Beautiful.
It's so perfect.
Thank you for reminding me of Nun Pizza Left Beef, because Jesus Christ. Every now and then that comes back into my brain. I remember how great that was.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I thought it happened like around 2012 or something. I didn't realize
like
it was
did,
2007.
Yeah. Because that was, I think, when Domino's, I think it was Domino's, right? Yeah.
Yep.
That was when they like first started doing online ordering. Jesus Christ. I just pulled up a picture of it again, too.
It's an inherently funny thing.
It's these kind of things that make me love the internet.
Yeah. Someone paid for that.
The sheer contempt with which it was put together. That might be the best part.
It's just strewn about. Yeah.
Just. Oh.
I haven't thought about Nun Pizza with left beef for a long time.
I can't believe it ever leaves anybody's consciousness.
It's always there. It lives in my brain. It just has to be pulled out of the cobwebs from time to time.
Yeah, it's right on eye level on my mental shelf. It's right there. It's always there. I'm never not thinking about just a disc of dough with beef thrown haphazardly.
Random smattering of beef pellets. Oh, what a great time to be alive.
This makes up for the ultimate degree of acceleration and myopia that the internet has given humanity. It's Nun Pizza Left Beef makes it all worth it.
I love that when you Google that, there's a Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
It's the first thing that comes up. And then you get the Google image search results, and then there's a Rolling Stone article about it. And then beneath that is a video from Hank Green, of all people, that says the truth about Nun Pizza with left beef. But even better, underneath that is a Reddit post from r/pizza crimes that just says, how does this sub feel about Nun Pizza with left beef? And they capitalize
From 10 months ago.
and LB. It's not even old, it's 10 months old.
God. There's I cannot go down that rabbit hole, but I guarantee there are 84 comments on that. And I guarantee there is a discourse. No, I'm sorry, it's 120 plus. The discourse there has to be insane.
The top comment, South Pizza with North Beef in a very confusing demilitarization zone. Edited because I fucking mixed up North and South, y'all. I'm an adult somehow.
I've never been happier to go so far off the rails with this show. Holy shit.
I gotta lay down.
I am legitimately crying right now.
Yeah, same. Oh my god.
You see what the internet could have been? What we could have had?
Yeah, they took this away from us, the bastards.
It could have been nothing but none pizza left beef and like
None pizza
50
left beef all the way down.
50-page treatises on how to take care of pet ferrets. But no, engagement.
Yeah, even Reddit was a victim of that by its own founder.
Well, I mean, I would argue that Reddit is a much more cynical enterprise from the get-go than most of these things.
Yeah,
like even
that's
maybe
fair.
more than Facebook.
Yeah, true. Considering Facebook has its origins in rating women as hot or not at Harvard University.
Yeah. Yeah, Zuckerberg just wanted to look at pretty women.
Oh, yeah. Yep, all because somebody broke up with him. Oh my god.
Yeah. Well, so then the next thing that happens is a return to the good old-fashioned fake biographies. And
Oh my god, yes,
associated
that's
tasks.
For some reason.
that is one of my favorite parts of this whole. Oh my god.
Yeah, we get a return to Vineland in the end of chapter 9.
With the U.S. Open biopics.
Yep. Oh my god.
Owen Wilson is Jack Nicklaus, Hugh Grant in the Phil Mickelson story.
I
And then the Christopher Walken bit fucking killed me.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I contend that Owen Wilson as Jack Nicklaus is actually an inspired casting choice.
It really is.
Oh. Damn. Well, I think that about sums up chapter 9, actually. And if there's any better indication that Pynchon wrote the second half of chapter 9 as a soothing balm for the constant paranoia of the previous 2.5 chapters, I think this podcast in the last 10 minutes is a good example of that. Is there anything else that we want to talk about from chapter 7 to 9?
The only other thing I'll mention is at the very end of chapter 9, my agoraphobia kicked in tremendously with the line, "There happens to be a more than moderate wind blowing that day, making the towers sway back and forth in 5 feel like 10-foot excursions." I really genuinely do not like being up high. So flying is always a nightmare, and I don't like being in tall buildings. And that's part of the reason. Like, we have what's called the Tower of Americas here, and my mother-in-law goes there pretty often, and I've had other people that have gone, and they will constantly talk about how you can feel it swaying when on a windy day. I'm like, why are you trying to sell me? Like, that is not a selling point for me. It shouldn't be a selling point for anybody. It terrifies me, and that part of the book reminded me of why I hate heights.
Yeah. Well, and also, he really does rip away the levity with the end of the chapter 2, because it's that line of seems kind of flimsy up here to Ziggy, and then he says, "Nah," says Jake, "built like a battleship," which is actually very true about the World Trade Center in real life. That building was considered indestructible. In the way that it was built by the Japanese contractors who built it in America, and just the foreshadowing of that sentence really is terrifying.
December 7th, 1941.
Yeah, a date which will live in infamy.
Yep.
Man.
But this gives me an opportunity to shoehorn in, and this is a true shoehorning. Usually I can make an excuse, but this is just me
No excuses here.
No excuses. To bring up the fact that Taipei 101 has one of the best architectural details of any building I'm aware of, where they basically built just a solid metal bar that goes from the top to the bottom, so that the wind and possible seismic activity wouldn't cause it to collapse instantly.
Huh.
To help prevent that kind of swaying that actually happens with super tall skyscrapers.
I've never actually looked at this building before. That's really cool looking too, architecturally.
I mean, yeah, like I'm it's not hot shit anymore because of the Burj Khalifa, but Taipei 101 is a really cool building from an architectural perspective.
It is. The Burj Khalifa is impressive in height, but I could take or leave the design of it.
Yeah, it's more engineering than aesthetic.
Yeah, definitely. The other aspect that I will bring up with the closing line of "It's built like a tank," is and once again another Josh Harris connection in real life. In April of 2001, a art collective known as Gelatin engaged in a art project, a public art project, I guess is the easiest way to describe it, where they, along with another art collective, who I can't remember the name of right now, obtained passes to be present in the World Trade Center for on the construction layers that they were like actively working on at the time. The other art collective lit up their name in the windows of the World Trade Center, but what Gelatin did is they actually removed a pane of glass from
I remember that.
the 93rd floor of the World Trade Center, and they built a load-bearing balcony where each of the members stood out on the balcony completely naked, and Josh Harris was in a helicopter circling the World Trade Center, taking photographs and video of the Gelatin members as they did it. And then this was put together in a book called The Bee Thing, that chronicled the whole like creation process of the project and had photographs. And this happened in April of 2001 and was a major controversy when it was published because it drew a lot of heat and skepticism at the World Trade Center for its supposed security and sort of impenetrability that this group of, I think they're Austrian or maybe Scandinavian artists, were able to not only gain like permanent access to a whole suite of floors on the World Trade Center, but also were able to remove a window and construct this whole thing. And Josh Harris says that after he recorded that whole thing, he was followed by the FBI for the rest of his life. So another little tidbit, not just about Josh Harris, but also about the supposed tank-like construction of that facility.
Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about that performance art thing, let alone any of those details.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Those Bee Thing books go for a lot of money now. They only did 1,200 of them, and I think the going rate if you want to buy one is about $5,000. Well, I believe that does take us to the ending of chapter 9, and thus this section. Do we have any funny moments that we didn't talk about? I see that you have the whole history of the NSA and Furbies in here, Cody.
Yeah. I was going to do a different part, but I do want to touch on that. So basically, going back to what we were talking about with the Furby potentially being used as a wiretapping device, the NSA was legitimately concerned about that happening. In January of 1999, they banned Furbies from entering the NSA's property due to concerns that they may be used to record and repeat classified information, advising those that see any on NSA property to contact their staff security officer for guidance. It was thought within the NSA that Furbies had an artificial intelligence chip that could learn from things the user said, and the NSA theorized that if employees discussed confidential information around the toys, that the information could later be repeated at a later date. It ultimately turned out to be not true. They didn't have any kind of recording capabilities whatsoever. But that just was a very little interesting and funny tidbit of actual history that was thrown in there.
Yeah.
The part I wanted to go back to was when Lucas and Justin escaped the restaurant after Ian Longspoon passed out writing the check. Just the absurdity of the people working at the restaurant trying to stop them. It's on page 71. Lucas reached stealthily for the checkbook and saw Justin making for the exit. Wait, hey, maybe somebody will catch this. Where are you going? You know what'll happen when he wakes up. We're not going to get stuck paying for another lunch we can't afford. It wasn't their most dignified moment. Waiters began hollering urgently into little lapel mics. Beach tan technocuties at distant tables who'd scan them with interest when they came in now turned away scowling. Truculent busboys splashed uneaten soup on them as they sped past. Choo-choo in the parking lot briefly, having considered keying Justin's ride, settled for spitting on it. Just a fun little escape the restaurant scenario that I got a pretty good chuckle out of.
Yeah, I love all the details in there too, between the lapel mics and like the women sizing them up as potential, like, you know, sugar daddies, just immediately turning away as soon as they were dining and dashing.
And throwing soup at them.
Yeah.
A little icing on that cake.
Man. I had no additional funny parts. Do you, Will?
I love the way that when Reg is explaining what he found at Hash Slingers, he refuses to acknowledge that he, even in like a technical, unenforceable sense, he did break laws.
Yeah.
That evasion of it is so funny because it boils down to him, you know, essentially just lying about picking a lock for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's dealing with a fraud investigator based in New York City. That's not something she's concerned about. It's not something that it makes sense for him to have any shame around, but he refuses. He refuses to acknowledge it.
It's against his principles, damn it.
Yeah.
Apparently. Either that or at least he believes that, you know, saying the right things in the same way that, you know, some more contemporary sovereign citizens might is how you avoid jail.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Really reminds me of a quote from The Sopranos where God, who's his Sil goes to talk to Tony and he says, I spoke to Paulie. He says it's on him, but he didn't do nothing. Oh God. So that takes us to quotes. Will, since I stole one of yours last week, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm gonna be fairly, I don't know if predictable, because I try to be fairly random with the specific quotes I grab from these chapters. But for once, I'm going with a pretty straightforward one on page 77 in the middle of the traipse through Deep Archer.
Mm-hmm.
Which eventually it is. The screen begins to shimmer and she is abruptly, you could say roughly, taken into a region of permanent dusk. Outer urban somehow, no longer aboard the train, no more jolly engineer or bodacious waitstaff, underpopulated streets increasingly unlit, as if public lamps are being allowed to burn out one by one in the realm of night to be restored by attrition. Above these somber streets, impossibly fractal towers feel their way like forest growth toward light that reaches this level only indirectly.
Mm.
And it's just kind of a return to that sort of very typical of Pynchon style that fills like the fourth section of Gravity's Rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just my favorite thing in the world when an author can somehow pull off this balancing act of characterizing internal monologue, exposition, and just thematic tone setting. I love that, and I love the way he does that in all of his books, but this is a perfect encapsulation of it.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good one. My quote comes from page 88, when it's going through the history of Maxine's trip up to Montreal, where it says, VIP is known to be doing business with shadowy elements in Quebec, where the zapper industry is flourishing at the moment. Back in the dead of last winter, Maxine got added to a city budget line, on the QT as always, and flown to Montreal to Chichère-le-Greek. Manifested into Dorval, checked into the Courtyard Marriott on Sherbrooke, and went schlepping around the city, one fool's errand after another, down into random gray buildings where many levels below the street, and down the corridors you'd hear cafeteria sounds. Round a corner, and here'd be the Tout Montreal having lunch in a lengthy series of eating rooms, strung in an archipelago across the underground city, which in those days seemed to be expanding so rapidly that nobody knew of a reliable map for it all. Plus, shopping enough to challenge Maxine's nausea threshold, back ends of metro stations, bars with live jazz, crepe emporia, and poutine outlets, vistas of sparkling new corridor just about to be tenanted by even more shops, all without any need to venture up into the snow-bound sub-zero streets. Finally, at a phone number obtained off a toilet wall at a bar in Mile End, she located one Felix Beaugenieu, who'd been working out of a basement apartment, what they call a garçonnière, off of Saint Denis, for whom Vip's name didn't just ring a bell, but threatened to kick the door in, since there were apparently some late payment issues. They arranged to meet at an internet-enabled laundromat called NetNet, soon to be a legend on the plateau. Felix looked almost as old enough to drive. There's just a lot of elements of that I love. I love the fact that it's one of, these sort of Pinchonian asides where he cuts from the narrative that he's telling to this long, expansive backstory, but just his descriptions of Montreal as Maxine is going through these underground corridors, the effect that it's having on her, her doing her investigations, and finally sort of like finding the person that's going to help her sort of complete this assignment, all in this one paragraph. It's very beautifully written, and it's such a great, again, him doing that hard-boiled writing style. I love that section of those chapters so much. It's so great.
That is great.
I very nearly stole that as my favorite comedic part, just because of the density of the interlingual puns.
Yeah. What about you, Cody? What's your favorite?
I'm going to go with the obvious of the splash screen on 74-75. But really, honestly, like almost any section of Chapter 7, I could have easily picked. But I'll go with this one. A splash screen comes on in shadow modulated 256 color daylight. No titles, no music. A tall figure dressed in black, could be either sex, long hair pulled back with a silver clip. The archer has journeyed to the edge of a great abyss. Down the road behind, in forced perspective, recede the sunlit distances of the surface world. Wild country, farmland, suburbs, expressways, misted city towers. The rest of the screen is claimed by the abyss. Far from an absence, it is a darkness pulsing with whatever light was before light was invented. The archer is poised at its edge, bow fully drawn, aiming steeply down into the immeasurable, uncreated, waiting. What can be seen of the face from behind, partly turned away, is attentive and unattached. A light wind is blowing in the grass and brush. Looks like we cheaped out and didn't bother to animate much, Justin comments, but look close and you can see the hair rippling too. I think the eyes blink once, but you have to be watching for it. We wanted stillness, but not paralysis. When the program is loaded, there is no main page, no music score, only a sound ambience, growing slowly louder, that Maxine recognizes from 1,000 train and bus stations and airports, and the smoothly cross-drawing image of an interior whose detail, for a moment breathtakingly, is far in advance of anything she's seen on the gaming platforms Ziggy and his friends tend to use, flaring beyond the basic video game brown of the time into the full color spectrum of very early morning. Polygons finely smoothed to all but continuous curves, the rendering, modeling, and shadows, blending and blur, handled elegantly, even with, could you call it genius? Making Final Fantasy X, anyway, look like an Etch-a-Sketch. A framed, lucid dream, it approaches and wraps Maxine, and strangely, without panic, she submits. That is just stellar writing. Absolutely stellar writing.
This copy of my book is highlighted and marginalia out, to crap. That was one of the first things that I think I like one of the first really long chunks of text that I highlighted in this book. That whole section across 2 pages. Well, most pinch on part of the chapter.
I'm just going to say chapter 7. That whole chapter, I think, just so perfectly encapsulates everything that I love about his writing. From the setting of the stakes of everything that we're getting into, the prose, the scenes of like what I just read, with Maxine going into Deep Archer and just all of it is so perfectly representative of the strengths of Pynchon as a writer, and it's showing that he has not lost his touch at all, and as this far into his career, at the end of his career ostensibly, is as strong as he has ever been.
Yeah, can't argue with that. Mine's pretty simple. It's the pizza joke, but between comprehensive pizza as a joke with how it's described afterwards, and then the Talmud joke. It's distinctly Pynchonian to make jokes about pizza for some reason. It seems to be in almost every book of his. And that Talmud line in particular, I feel like I don't think there's any other author who could come up with that. William?
We've really discussed most of what I would be selecting from. I might just choose the way that Horst is introduced to the book. Because, I mean, from the start, you've got layers of film references and just weird jokes that are unending, and all of it in pursuit of just like basically trying to do some very surface level character development. It's just it's very typical of him in a way that it's fun.
We did receive one email from a listener. Cody, did you want to read that?
Yeah, we got an email from Scott, who said, "Hey guys, I'm working my way through Penchant's canon for the first time and happened to find your podcast at the perfect moment in my life. It has been wonderful reading it with all of you, and I appreciate the research and insight you bring to his work every episode. So I heard you guys are talking about how Otto Kugelblitz felt like it had a level of intentionality to it as a name, and I wanted to share what I found on the subject. In astrophysics, a Kugelblitz is a concentration of heat, light, or energy so intense that it creates a black hole and traps itself inside. As Kate mentioned, Otto is a German name that means wealth or wealthy. So when you add these two things together, you get something along the lines of a black hole for wealth, which I felt was very apropos since it's a school for wealthy children with a patently ridiculous concept. Here's the Wikipedia entry for Kugelblitz if you want to check it out. Thanks again for all you add to my understanding of Penchant and his work." And I'll go ahead and throw the link for that into the show notes. But thank you, Scott. It's really kind of you, and I'm glad that we can give you something to assist in your reading. I do also want to mention for everyone listening, Penchant and Public Day is coming up. We forgot to do this last year, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
So I did want to just bring it up real quick. For anyone who doesn't know, May 8th is every year's Penchant and Public Day, and essentially the idea is that you celebrate Thomas Penchant's work by reading his work in public and posting photos of it online. There is a Twitter account that has been doing this for a while now, so if you want to participate, send any pictures you have to @PenchantInPublic, and show off your love, and who knows, maybe you'll find someone that shares your appreciation of his work, or someone will just ask what you're reading and you get to gush about Penchant and maybe make a new fan.
Yeah, definitely. Also, feel free to let us know what you're doing on Penchant and Public Day across any of our social media channels. Our email, as always, is mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. We are also at twitter.com. I refuse to call it X. @PinchOnPod is our handle there. And we are also on Instagram at Mapping the Zone Podcast is the name of our account there. So we do always love to hear from listeners. I know all of us have been pretty psyched as our engagement has risen over the course of the last 2 seasons in particular. And just, keep reaching out, keep letting us know your different discoveries. Thank you for that insight on Kugelblitz. That makes a lot more sense than having to do something to do with the Nazi military operation. Thank you so much as always for listening. We will be back next week discussing chapters 10 through 12.
Bye.
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 Are we just the worst barbershop
It's
quartet ever?
entirely possible.
We should start merging the buys closer and closer together until we hit it and harmonize.
Bye, bye, bye. Oh my god. In the midst of recording, my cat, who is sitting behind my record shelf, pushed a record out, which I think she wants me to play tonight.
Ooh, which one?
Check. The big winner is Puberty 2 by Mitski.
Okay.
work. Yeah.
She's got good taste in music. She likes Built to Spill. She likes David
Nice.
Bowie. She likes Amy Winehouse. She likes Buffalo Springfield. Yeah, all of the records that she's pushed slightly out of the shelf have all been pretty great listens.
Have you ever listened? Speaking of Built to Spill, have you heard Caustic Resin?
No.
So I was re-listening to them today. So the main guy that does Caustic Resin, Brett Netson, has a long-running association with Doug Marsh. I think he was on the first EP that Built to Spill did. Yeah, he was, because it was a split with Caustic Resin. Yeah. So if you like Built to Spill, especially like their earlier stuff, I would check out Caustic Resin. They're really good.
Nice. I'll add that to my list. My favorite record of Built to Spills is Perfect From Now On.
Oh, that. So I saw them when they I've seen them twice now. I saw them on the anniversary tour for Keep It Like a Secret, which is that's my personal favorite. But Perfect From Now On is right up there. I love that album.
I think I had Keep It Like a Secret spoiled for me because I had so many people tell me how great it was, and then I listened to it and I was like, it's okay, but it's not Perfect From Now On. Yeah.
That's one that weirdly I stumbled on, and I judged an album by its cover when it came out.
It's a bad cover.
They were really heavily featuring it in I can't remember which skate magazine it was. I want to say it was Thrasher, and they were pretty heavily promoting it, which was weird because when I finally I mentioned it to my brother-in-law, and he was already a big fan of them, so he's like, "Yeah, check it out. They're great." So when I heard it, I was like, man, that's weird for Thrasher to be really hyped on an album like that. But I ended up falling in love with it. So
nice.
But Perfect From Now On does have my favorite Built to Spill song, which would be I Would Hurt a Fly.
That's a very good one. Yeah. Really, really good one. My favorite is probably Randy Described Eternity.
Oh, that's
just
their
that
live album is really good.
It is that Cortez the Killer cover.
God, it's so good.
That goes for 20 minutes is amazing.
Yeah, I remember I had that on when we bought my house. We had to do a lot of work on it because it was a repo, and I remember I had that album on when my dad was here and we were doing some work around here, and that song was on. And at one point, like maybe 10 minutes into the song, he's like, "What the hell happened? Did the guitarist like leave and go get a sandwich or something?" Because it's just like that. There's a section in the middle where it just kind of loops for a while and builds up, and yeah, my dad has no patience for songs over 4 minutes. So
that's a shame. I'm one of those people that if I look at an album and it's got 4 songs on it and they're all 15 minutes, I'm like, hell yeah. This is gonna be great.
We're gonna have a good time. Yeah, I think it says a lot about me that my favorite Sonic Youth song is 20 minutes long, and I absolutely love every moment of it.
Which one is that?
The Diamond Sea on Washing Machine.
Yeah, that's fair. Washing Machine is so good. Every time I go into one of the record stores here and I look at that first press of Washing Machine that's still in the shrink wrap.
You still haven't bought that?
No, I haven't. He wants $184 for it.
I don't know about that.
Yeah,
it seems a little high.
I think he's a really big Sonic Youth fan because it's one of these record stores where there's one guy that runs it and it's the owner. I think he's a really big Sonic Youth fan, so he's like, if someone wants to pay me this much for it, I'll let it go. But otherwise, I'm not. I'm
just showing it off at that point.
Yeah, because he has that, and then like right next to that is the like deluxe like 4 LP pressing of Goo that came out in like it's like one of the first pressings of that album that they did. Yeah, so I think he's just a big fan.
Because even I'm looking on Discogs, and you can get a first edition Washing Machine for $80.
Yeah, I think he's just real hyped about the fact that it's still in the shrink wrap.
I mean, I probably wouldn't even open it. I'd probably just frame that one.
And that's the difficulty, right? Is that like I want to buy it, but I also want to listen to it.
Yeah, I know. That's the hard part.
One of my favorite movies, obviously, is High Fidelity, and there's a scene where he's walking around in his apartment, and you can see that he does the same thing with like a door frame in his apartment, and he's got Goo up there.
Yep.
So when I moved into this apartment, I was like, oh, hell yeah, I can do the same thing.
That's a good choice. I'm looking at the space above my office door, and I'm realizing I probably could have done that too.
There's still time.
Nah, not really. So the only records I have left are framed and on my wall in the living room.
Well, you can go to a record store and you can get records to put up on your
Well,
door.
but then I'm taking it away from somebody who could listen to it.
There's no one saying you can't listen to it.
Well, the lack of a record player in my house tells me I can't listen to it.
I believe those are for sale.
I need to get a new one. I know. I don't necessarily regret offloading my collection because it was huge, and it just became a matter of space, and I didn't have the time to listen to records that I used to have. So that was, but most of it I think went to people who genuinely care. I sold off pretty much my entire Nine Inch Nails collection to one dude in Colorado.
Nice.
So
yeah, I'm going through mine and I'm trimming the fat, certainly. Like, do I need this? Is this an essential album for my collection?
See, but that's the thing, is if I started buying records again, it would go right back to collecting again.
Yeah, right.
There's no way I'm going to be able to stop myself from, especially when I've got, like, my son's getting really into music and is always asking me for recommendations. I'm going to be like, well, let me teach you about sitting down and listening to records and, like, not having your phone with you and really engaging with the music on a different level. And then that's going to turn into a whole thing.
Sounds like a perfect way to get your son into music.
You know, I know it really is, but that's going down that rabbit hole again, and I can't. Not yet.
Yeah, I'm certainly more of a listener than a collector. Like, I will buy an album not because it's worth money, but because I want to listen to it. So
yeah. No, I listened to everything I had.
I believe you for sure.
The collector thing drove me insane, especially when Discogs got, I don't know how it is anymore, but it was getting to a pretty bad point where, you know, people were intentionally trying to sell stuff for exorbitant amounts of money. And I'm, you know, just like, people want to listen to this. Like, give it to people who want to enjoy it, not just someone who's going to have the clout of owning that album and whatever.
Yeah, that market still exists on Discogs, but I think I think it's calmed down a little bit. I think it's mostly the record store day releases now where those come out and then they sell for insane prices for 12 hours and then they go down to a normal price after that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I've never owned a record, and I believe it or not, I can sit and listen to the music without using any other devices. So I don't think it's necessary.
No, it's not. I just need to get him used to, like, I've given him, my wife and I made a playlist of music for him, of, like, basically single songs that we would recommend to him, and the idea is that he comes back to us and is like, I like this song and I like this song and I didn't like this song, and then he would explain, like, what he did or didn't like about this so that we could kind of build him a more cohesive collection of artists that he might like. So that's been pretty good. He's been getting into some pretty cool stuff as a result of that. But he's also, like, I think he's a little hesitant to listen to certain things because he's afraid people at school are gonna, like, give him shit about it. And I'm like, dude, don't. I spent too much time worrying about that, and, like, I lost a lot of time listening to really cool shit because I was worried about what other people were going to think. Like, just if you dig something, just dig it and own it, man.
Yeah, I think the difference will, at least for me, because you're right, you can just, like, you know, get like a high quality DAC or whatever and plug into a streaming service or CDs or, you know, whatever you want to do. I think the thing with records is that the enforced 22-minute I need to get up and change this kind of puts you in a state where you can't do anything else. You can, but ideally I think it creates a better space for you to just sit there and really soak into it, because, you know, you're going to have to get up and flip it over. That is a bit different from listening to music on another service or device.
No, sure. Yeah, no, I was just making a joke.
Oh, yeah, it's true.
I totally get the value of that, because that's very real. It's just I just find, and I recognize you weren't doing this, I just find it very funny the way that some people do talk about records as though anything but getting up every 22 minutes to flip the vinyl over is somehow corrupting the nature of listening.
Oh yeah, no. Vinyl is not
Yeah.
even a perfect medium for that. It's
Oh, don't be careful who you say that to, because Jesus Christ, you'll some of the people. Oh, one of my roommates in college was one of those self-proclaimed audiophiles that would
Mhm.
try to tout how vinyl was this like perfect medium of music, and I just every time he started talking about it, I would just roll my eyes at him.
It's
Ugh.
really close, but it's kind of like putting water through a purifier 7 times, but then at the
Yeah,
very end of
exactly.
it's at the very end of it peeing in it just a little bit. It- like it
Well-
is definitely one of the best like audio mediums you can have if you're looking for like just clear, direct from the record to home stereo, no fucking with it, as Mark Maron would say.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's not perfect.
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
here's the thing. You could hypothetically sit there and run. Like, I've been trying to figure out for like the last 5 minutes a better way to phrase this, but I'm going ahead. You could sit there and just stick your tongue into the grooves if you really wanted to, and you would be meaningfully experiencing the music. And that's an amazing thing.
Uh-huh.
So I have like 1,000 times, maybe billions times more respect for vinyl than cassette, for example.
Hey.
Nope, no hey. It is objectively bad.
It's well, okay. So here's the thing that I see it as. Like, I think at a certain point, I get that I feel like you stop caring about listening to the music and you're more concerned about listening to the sound. And
Mhm.
there's a distinct line between those two things. And I feel like a lot of times the audiophiles will go beyond, it's no longer just about listening to music. It's like they have to have this like weird purity that exists only in this particular medium, whatever it is that they're going to argue for. When I think that ultimately, like it's like reading a book. You can read the hardcover or you can read a mass market paperback. It's the same words in there. You're getting the
Mhm.
same experience, or you're getting the same media. It's a matter of how you experience it. And I think that there's something to being lost when you're in pursuit of this like perfect tone or
Mhm.
perfect sound. And I've had way more awesome and engaging experiences with music through the shitty speakers on my Ford Taurus from a CD that was playing in a portable CD player on my floor, taped to a shirt so that it wouldn't bump the shock absorber, that was then running through a cassette adapter into my tape deck. Like there was no passable quality and sound in that,
Yeah.
but I discovered so much cool music in those drives on
Mhm.
listening to that shitty music, or that shitty
Mhm.
sound, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree completely. It's more about the ritual than it is about anything else. And yeah, when you get to a certain point of audiophile dumb, I don't know how to describe it, like you do end up just being like, well, this isn't exactly correct, so now I got to get another $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Like the people who start replacing the cables in their stuff,
Yeah.
where I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. This is kind of like buying an 8K TV where you're beyond the abilities of the human eye to distinguish resolution.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need to stop.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like you get all this equipment and then you're going to, you put a record on and then you spend the entirety of that record playing with the equalizer, trying to get the sound the way you want it. And,
Mhm.
you haven't engaged with the music at all.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, so I once downloaded a 24-bit FLAC edition of some album. I don't even remember what it was. And then I encoded it various different ways. And I sat and I examined, both in the waveform and by ear, the way that the hi-hats were coming through and the way the vocals were blending and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's stupid. It's objectively stupid.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember stumbling upon the community of people who compare and contrast in-ear monitors for listening to music, and reading them talking about how consonants sound in vocals made me want to throw my computer into a lake. Where I was like, this is how far you're going into this rabbit hole. Oh, I really like these in-ear monitors because the vowel sounds are just really just perfect. Like,
I can hear the guitar player's shoes squeaking on the floor.
yeah.
It really adds to the song.
Now, that being said, I have had moments like that, Cody, where I have a record by Ohm where it was clearly one of those recordings, and these are probably like my favorite recordings as far as albums go, where it's not like multi-track recording, it's just a live performance recorded in a studio. And I think it's Conference of the Birds, if I remember correctly, where I could hear Al Cisneros's fingers hitting the actual like fretboard on the vinyl copy of it that I have. That I did think was pretty cool.
That's kind of cool when you can find it by accident. That's cool.
Yeah,
I'm saying when you're going and like searching for those things, that's when it's a little, you're going a little over. But I love those little accidents that come up on records. One of the things I really love, and this came up, I don't remember what album we had on, but my son brought it up when we were in the car. There was a song that was very prominently, you could hear the guitarist's fingers, like the calluses on their fingers, like scraping the strings as they were refretting their hands and everything. And he was like, why don't they just take that out? Like, it's noisy. I was like, honestly, that's one of my favorite parts about a song sometimes is like hearing that kind of scratchy, like up close and personal part of the guitar, and like,
yeah,
really adds to the song. So I was, I kind of wish I could remember what we were listening to then.
Yeah, that can definitely be very cool.
Well, like my favorite example of that kind of thing, it's basically a tie between, I forget what song it is. I think it's Resolution on A Love Supreme. Just some of the chat between the band members.
Oh, sure. Jazz records had some great little banter before songs.
Between that and you can hear the cocaine in in Stevie Nicks' sinuses on a few of the songs on Rumors.
Yeah,
and that's amazing.
That album I think comes with cocaine just kind of cooked into all of it.
There's a little baggie of it inside.
Absolutely. But I love that between the takes on the same hook, where it's not supposed to be a progression, you can hear the just slightly stuffed.
There's a Neil Young song off of Greendale, Bandit, and you can, like, the very beginning of the song starts with that his fingers going across the strings, and it's that song just in general. He's touring again, and it pisses me off that he's not coming around here.
Do you want to see Neil Young on his deathbed?
I just want to see him. I've never seen him. I've had opportunities, and I missed those opportunities.
All right, that's more understandable.
He's playing the lost verses of Cortez the Killer in addition to everything else that he's doing. Nice. Okay. So, yeah. But of course he's not. I don't blame him for not coming to Texas, because I don't blame anybody for not coming to Texas.
Yeah, one of my coworkers texted me. He was like, "Hey, the Damned are coming to Milwaukee," and I was like, I don't know if I want to see the Damned now.
Yeah, there's certain bands, in all honesty, like some art, like Neil Young still can get the job done, I think, but like certain bands, I think after there's a shelf life for live viewing that I think, I think the Damned are definitely past that.
Yeah, another punk band. I love Agent Orange. I think Living in Darkness is like one of the best punk records ever.
Agent Orange is great. And
they're gonna be in Milwaukee, I believe, doing a show for like a skate contest. And I had a bunch of people send me that flyer because they know that I love Agent Orange and also skateboard. And I was like, I don't think I need to see Agent Orange in 2024. Like, I love that you sent this to me, but I feel like that's gonna not be that great.
Yeah. There's just those. Honestly, a lot of the punk bands from that, like the 70s, 80s, would probably not be great to see anymore. Dead Kennedys, obviously, Jello's not there, so that's a hard pass.
Black Flag, not interested.
Black Flag, Henry Rollins, they're coming to San Antonio, but obviously no.
Sans Henry Rollins, not worth it.
Yeah.
They lost all credibility as a band when they released that album with that album cover art.
Jesus.
That's another one for you to look up, Will, if you haven't seen that already.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was it?
It's called What the? It's a real late Black Flag record.
Oh yeah, I mean I've seen that one. Of course I've seen that one.
It's so bad.
Forgot the name, but yeah, that image doesn't leave your brain.
It's like a Scholastic Ripley's Believe It or Not book that you'd see at a book fair.
Well, it looks like they got a hold of, I don't even remember the name of it. There was a piece of software that was like Photoshop crossed with word art for literal children.
Yeah.
It looks like you used
Yeah.
that and loaded in like clip art that you found on the pre-Google internet.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Ugh.
Oh, I forgot Mike Vallely was the vocalist on that album.
Yeah, sure
That-
was.
That came out in 2013?
Sure did.
Mhm.
Same year as Bleeding
Jesus
Edge.
Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I saw it a while ago. I thought it was from, like, the late 90s.
Nope.
Jesus Christ.
Nope. Craig Ginn, every once in a while, decides that he's going to further piss in the legacy of his band that started his record label and does something else with Black Flag that is completely unnecessary.
And what a way to not only ruin Black Flag's legacy, but Mike Vallely's simultaneously.
Yeah, right.
That dude wasn't asking for it. My fondest memory of that dude is watching him simultaneously fight like 4 guys on an old skate video.
Mm-hmm. It's a legendary moment.
It really is.
It's like Eric Costin getting his wallet stolen, and
Yeah.
right.